Deep beneath the sun-baked ruins of ancient Nippur, in a sealed chamber that had remained untouched for approximately 4,000 years, archaeologists working in coordination with the Iraqi State Board of Antiquities and the Oriental Institute of Chicago encountered something extraordinary during a systematic survey conducted in the autumn of 2019. Ground-penetrating radar had flagged an anomaly beneath the southeastern precinct of the Ekur temple complex, a void that preliminary analysis suggested was a natural geological formation. But when excavation teams cleared the overlying debris at a depth of approximately 9 meters below the current surface, they encountered a limestone-sealed vault constructed with engineering precision that challenged every expectation for late 3rd millennium Mesopotamian construction. The ceiling stones, each weighing between 2 and 4 metric tons, were fitted together with tolerances that modern laser measurement tools subsequently recorded at less than 1 millimeter across joins spanning several meters. Bitumen sealant had been applied in alternating layers with a refined mineral compound that laboratory analysis identified as containing antimicrobial properties, which explains the extraordinary preservation conditions found within the chamber. Inside the vault, arranged on stone shelving carved directly from the bedrock, and positioned according to astronomical orientations that correspond precisely to stellar alignments, documented in the Meolopin Compendium, archaeologists recovered 6 cuneiform tablets, unlike any previously catalogued from Mesopotamian archaeological contexts. These tablets are not composed of standard Nippur clay. Neutron activation analysis conducted at the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History in Leipzig revealed a mineral composition incorporating trace elements of lapis lazuli, crushed meteoric iron, and a crystalline silicate compound of uncertain terrestrial origin. The tablets measure consistently at 31 centimeters in length, 19 centimeters in width, and 4 centimeters in depth, dimensions that correspond exactly to the divine measuring unit known as the Nindanu, as specified in Sumerian administrative records. Most significantly, 4 of the 6 tablets were accessible for preliminary scholarly analysis, while the remaining 2 were encased in an additional inner seal of unknown metallic composition that has thus far resisted conventional opening attempts without risking destruction of the contents. In the 14 months since preliminary translations of the 4 accessible tablets were completed by an international team led by Dr. Alexei Voronov of the Oriental Institute and Dr. Layla Hassan of Baghdad University's Department of Ancient Near Eastern Studies, the scholarly community has been grappling with implications that challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature and purpose of Mesopotamian cuneiform literature. What these tablets contain is not administrative inventory, not royal propaganda, not mythological narrative in any conventional sense. What they contain appears to be operational documentation, technical records of a kind that has no established parallel in the entire corpus of known ancient literature. The evidence we are about to examine spans 4 of the 6 recovered tablets, drawing connections between astronomical navigation systems, biological modification protocols, and departure chronologies that align with prophecies recorded across 17 independent ancient cultures. If what these translations reveal challenges everything you believed about the origins of human civilization, consider following this investigation as we systematically examine what the sealed vault of Nippur has spent 4 millennia waiting to tell us. The engineering of the Nippur vault itself presents the first and perhaps most fundamental anomaly in this investigation, because the methods used to seal it demonstrate a level of long-term preservation planning that conventional archaeology has no framework to explain. Dr. Voronov's excavation report, submitted to the Oriental Institute in February of 2021, and designated Field Report NP 2021-07 in the Institute's archive system, documents construction techniques in the vault's sealing apparatus that required not merely the knowledge of how to preserve materials across centuries, but the deliberate intention to preserve them across millennia. The limestone blocks forming the outer vault walls were quarried from a source that geological survey has since traced to the Zagros mountain foothills, approximately 240 kilometers northeast of Nippur, a sourcing decision that appears motivated by the specific density and mineral composition of this limestone variant, which creates a natural electromagnetic shielding effect that laboratory testing confirms would protect the chamber's contents from ionizing radiation over an extended time period. The builders of this vault were not thinking in generations, they were thinking in thousands of years. To understand the full significance of what was found beneath the Ekur temple complex, it is necessary to appreciate how extraordinary the construction effort itself would have been. Quarrying limestone blocks of the required dimensions from the Zagros foothills and transporting them to Nippur across 240 kilometers of alluvial plain, terrain without natural stone and without wheeled transport infrastructure as conventionally reconstructed for the early second millennium before the Common Era, represents a logistical undertaking that would have required sustained organizational commitment at a scale comparable to the construction of the great ziggurat platforms themselves. The blocks were not simply transported and stacked. Each block in the vault's outer wall system was shaped to a tolerance that Dr. Voronoff's laser measurement survey, conducted during the initial chamber clearance in October of 2019, recorded at less than 1 millimeter across, joints spanning up to 3 meters in width. The positioning precision required to achieve this tolerance across a three-dimensional chamber structure measuring 14 meters in length, 8 meters in width, and 4 meters in internal height, demanded either measuring instruments of extraordinary refinement or construction methods operating according to principles that conventional archaeology does not assign to this period. The sealing materials applied to the joins between limestone blocks provide an additional layer of anomaly that the field report addresses in considerable technical detail. Standard Mesopotamian construction employed bitumen as a primary sealant and waterproofing agent, and bitumen is indeed present in the Nippur vault sealing compound. But the bitumen is mixed with two additional components that laboratory analysis by the Oriental Institute's Conservation Chemistry Department, completed in August of 2020, identified as crystalline gypsum ground to a particle size below 2 microns and a third substance initially resistant to identification that subsequent analysis at the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research in Leipzig characterized as a complex organic polymer with no natural analogue in the Mesopotamian environmental record, displaying chemical characteristics consistent with the synthetic compound rather than a naturally occurring biological product. The presence of a synthetic polymer in a construction context dating to the early second millennium before the Common Era represents exactly the kind of materials science anomaly that conventional archaeology struggles to accommodate within its existing interpretive frameworks, yet the stratigraphic integrity of the vault's context is unambiguous, confirmed by 3 independent dating methods including optically stimulated luminescence of the surrounding sediment, radiocarbon dating of organic inclusions in the bitumen sealant itself, and archaeomagnetic dating of fired brick elements incorporated into the vault's floor structure, all of which converge on a construction date between 1900 and 1800 before the Common Era. The internal environment created by this extraordinary sealing system proved, upon investigation, to have maintained conditions of remarkable stability across the approximately 3,800 years between construction and discovery. Temperature monitoring equipment installed during the initial excavation phase recorded internal temperatures within the sealed vault that varied by less than 2 degrees Celsius across a full annual cycle, in contrast to external surface temperatures at the Nippur site that fluctuate by more than 40 degrees Celsius between summer and winter. Humidity measurements confirmed near zero moisture content in the vault's interior atmosphere, a condition that the complex polymer component of the sealing compound appears to have maintained through hygroscopic absorption of any moisture that penetrated the outer limestone barrier. The atmospheric composition of the sealed interior, sampled through a controlled access port installed during the excavation's second phase in March of 2020, showed oxygen content depleted to approximately 4%, and carbon dioxide elevated to approximately 12%, conditions that would prevent biological degradation of organic materials while remaining within ranges compatible with the long-term stability of clay, stone, and metallic objects. Whatever was placed inside this vault was placed there by people who knew precisely how to keep it intact for a period that their engineering calculations apparently anticipated with accuracy sufficient to achieve the intended result across 4 millennia. The vault's floor structure reinforces this impression of deliberate, technically sophisticated long-term planning. Rather than simple packed earth or standard fired brick, the floor consists of a raised platform of interlocking limestone elements, incorporating drainage channels of carved basalt, whose gradient, as measured by the survey team, maintains a consistent fall of 0.3 degrees across the platform's entire surface, directing any condensation that might form on the floor surface toward collection sumps positioned at the vault's 4 corners. The sumps themselves were found to contain a dark crystalline material that materials analysis subsequently identified as zeolite, a naturally occurring mineral with exceptional moisture-absorbing properties that is found in geological deposits approximately 400 kilometers north of Nippur, in the region of modern Kurdistan. Its presence in the vault floor sumps confirms that the builders sourced specific materials from geographically distant locations, not for symbolic or decorative reasons, but for their functional properties in maintaining the internal environment that the vault's contents required. The totality of the engineering evidence points toward a construction program that was systematic, technically informed, geographically extensive in its resource procurement, and oriented toward a preservation timeline that no conventional model of ancient Mesopotamian institutional planning accommodates. The vault was built to last, and it did, when Dr. Hassan's materials science team submitted samples from the 4 accessible Nippur vault tablets for neutron activation analysis in the spring of 2020. The results produced what the lead analyst at the Max Planck Institute described in the internal project notes as a compositional profile with no known Mesopotamian parallel. The clay matrix itself is consistent with alluvial deposits from the southern Mesopotamian floodplain, confirming local manufacture, but the additive compounds incorporated into the clay before firing tell a fundamentally different story. The lapis lazuli traces are not decorative, as lapis was typically applied to Mesopotamian artifacts as surface pigment, but are instead homogeneously distributed throughout the tablet's interior at a concentration of approximately 0.3% by mass, a quantity and distribution method that required pulverizing lapis to a fineness of less than 5 microns before mixing it into the clay body. The meteoric iron component, detected through distinctive isotopic ratios that distinguish extraterrestrial iron from terrestrial ore, constitutes approximately 0.7% of the tablet's total mass, again distributed throughout the interior rather than applied as surface treatment. when the tablets were placed within a calibrated electromagnetic field as part of the materials analysis process. The crystalline silicate compound distributed throughout their structure demonstrated resonance properties at specific frequencies, a discovery that the team initially documented as an equipment anomaly before 3 independent replications confirmed it as a material property of the tablets themselves. The significance of the lapis lazuli distribution method extends beyond the obvious technical challenge of achieving it. Neutron activation analysis confirmed that the lapis was sourced from the Sarisang mines in the Badakhshan region of modern Afghanistan, the primary source for lapis lazuli throughout the ancient Near East, but the particle size achieved in the Nippur vault tablets, below 5 microns, is substantially finer than any lapis preparation documented in Mesopotamian pigment analysis from any period. Achieving such fineness requires either mechanical grinding equipment capable of sustained operation at tolerances far below those of any known ancient grinding apparatus, or chemical processing methods that break down the mineral structure without affecting the elemental composition that neutron activation detects. Dr. Marco Ferretti of the Istituto Nazionale di Fisica Nucleare in Frascati, who co-authored the neutron activation analysis report, published as a supplementary appendix to the Oriental Institute field report in November of 2021, concluded that the lapis preparation method used for the Nippur vault tablets has no documented parallel in the archaeometric literature, and that its functional purpose within the tablet matrix remains undetermined by conventional materials science frameworks. The meteoric iron component presents an equally challenging puzzle when its intentionality is considered alongside its origin. Meteoric iron, distinguishable from smelted terrestrial iron by its characteristic nickel content and distinctive isotopic ratios, was known and valued in ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, primarily for its rarity and its association with celestial origins. The Sumerian term for meteoric iron, anbar, translates literally as sky metal and appears in texts designating objects of special ritual or ceremonial significance. But using meteoric iron as a finely powdered interior additive in a clay writing surface, distributed homogeneously throughout the body of a document rather than applied as decoration or incorporated as a structural element, represents an application of this material that has no parallel in the entire archaeological record of the ancient Near East. The quantity involved, 0.7% of total tablet mass across 4 tablets, whose combined weight Dr. Voronoff's field report records as approximately 12 kilograms, means that approximately 84 grams of processed meteoric iron was incorporated into the tablet manufacturing process. Given that individual meteorites large enough to yield processable iron in ancient conditions were rare discoveries that were typically preserved and curated as sacred objects, deliberately incorporating this material into document substrates suggests that whoever produced the Nippur vault tablets considered the electromagnetic and material properties of meteoric iron to be functionally essential to the tablet's purpose rather than symbolically desirable. The resonance behavior of the crystalline silicate compound at specific electromagnetic frequencies, confirmed by 3 independent replications at the Max Planck Institute's Materials Characterization Facility, adds a 3rd dimension of anomaly to the tablet's composition profile. The specific frequencies at which the resonance effect was documented, 14.1 MHz and 28.2 MHz, correspond to frequencies that have no obvious significance in conventional materials, science context, but that Dr. Ibrahim al-Khatib of the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology's Electromagnetic Research Group, consulted by Voronoff's team in the summer of 2021, identified as resonant frequencies consistent with nuclear magnetic resonance behavior in hydrogen-bearing molecular structures, a phenomenon whose technological exploitation was not officially discovered until the mid-20th century of the Common Era. Whether the resonance properties of the crystalline silicate compound in the Nippur vault tablets reflect deliberate design, fortuitous material selection, or analytical coincidence remains genuinely uncertain. What is not uncertain is that 3 independent experimental replications have confirmed that the effect is real, reproducible, and characteristic of the specific compound composition used in the tablets. The compositional profile of these objects, taken in its entirety, does not describe a writing surface. It describes a medium engineered according to principles that no currently accepted model of ancient Mesopotamian technology can explain. The first of the 4 translated tablets, designated Nippur Vault Tablet 1, in the Oriental Institute's cataloguing system and assigned the reference code NVT001, introduces itself through an opening formulaic passage that Dr. Voronoff's team spent 6 weeks debating before reaching consensus on its translation. The passage employs a variant of archaic Sumerian that incorporates approximately 43 logographic signs with no established parallels in the existing corpus of 30,000 catalogued Sumerian sign variants, requiring the team to develop provisional interpretive frameworks based on contextual analysis before systematic translation could proceed. What emerged from the first tablet's 216 lines of text, once the team had established functional interpretations for the novel signs, was a document that reads not as religious literature, not as mythological narrative, and not as administrative record in any conventional sense, but rather as what Dr. Hassan described in her preliminary presentation to the Society for Near Eastern Studies in October of 2021 as a territorial governance framework of extraordinary systematic precision, detailing the division of Earth's geographical regions into administrative domains governed by specific entities, whose titles, responsibilities, and operational boundaries are described with the specificity of a modern civil service charter. The 43 novel logographic signs that distinguish the opening passage of NVT001 from all previously known Sumerian texts required the translation team to develop what Dr. Voronoff described in the field report as a provisional interpretive matrix, a structured approach to determining sign meanings through multiple overlapping analytical methods that could compensate for the absence of direct parallels in the existing sign corpus. The methods employed included distributional analysis, examining how the novel signs relate positionally to known signs in the same passages, semantic field analysis, identifying recurring associations between novel signs and known signs of established meaning, comparative analysis against the Ugaritic, Elamite, and Proto-Elamite sign inventories for parallel forms not present in the standard Sumerian corpus, and what the team termed internal redundancy analysis, identifying passages where the same concept appeared to be expressed both through novel signs and through conventional Sumerian phrasing, allowing the novel signs' values to be inferred from their equivalences with known material. The 6-week consensus-building process for the opening passage was not, therefore, a process of interpretation by intuition, but a systematic analytical exercise whose conclusions are grounded in multiple, independent lines of evidence. The provisional nature of the interpretations acknowledges the inherent uncertainty of working with unparalleled material, but the consistency of the resulting translation across all 4 tablets, in which the same novel signs consistently appear in contexts that support the same provisional meanings, provides cumulative validation of the interpretive framework that grows progressively stronger as the corpus is analyzed in its entirety. What the first tablet's opening passage establishes, once the novel sign system is decoded, is a document identity statement of a kind familiar from other Mesopotamian administrative texts, but expressed with unusual specificity about the authority from which the document derives and the purpose it is intended to serve. The document identifies itself as the primary record of the division of territories for the appointed times, issued under the authority of those who set the measure of heaven, and states that it was sealed within the house beneath the house of Enlil to remain until the appointed times return. This self-referential opening is extraordinary for several reasons. Mesopotamian administrative texts routinely identify their issuing authority and subject matter, but they do not typically describe their own physical disposition or anticipate their own future discovery. The statement that the tablet was sealed to remain until the appointed time's return implies foreknowledge of a future retrieval context, and the phrase "the house beneath the house of Enlil," now interpretable as a description of the underground vault beneath the Ekur temple complex dedicated to Enlil at Nippur, confirms that the physical location of the vault's discovery was already specified in the tablet's own text at the time of its creation, a recursive self-location that has no parallel in the existing corpus of Sumerian literature, and that raises questions about the temporal perspective from which the document's creators were operating that conventional historiography has no established framework to address. The hierarchical structure revealed in Nippur Vault Tablet 1 extends beyond the three-tier division of Anu, Enlil, and Enki that scholars have long recognized from the standard Mesopotamian textual corpus. The tablet documents a governance structure consisting of 7 administrative tiers, each designated by a specific logographic compound that combines an authority marker with a domain identifier, creating what Dr. Voronov's team has termed a positional nomenclature system where rank and function are linguistically inseparable rather than expressed as separate concepts. The highest tier, occupied by entities designated with the sign compound that the team provisionally translates as those who set the measure of heaven, contains only 3 positions, corresponding to the familiar Anu, Enlil, and Enki designations. But the second tier, previously unattested in any known cuneiform text, documents 12 specific positions described as those who hold the boundaries between domains, each assigned specific geographical territories delineated by astronomical rather than terrestrial markers, meaning their boundaries are defined by stellar alignments and solstice sunrise positions rather than rivers, mountain ranges, or political borders. The specificity of these territorial descriptions is extraordinary, and one boundary is defined as the line drawn from the point where the bright star of the eastern path rises during the Long Count festival to the point where the wandering star of Enki sets during the festival of the returning waters, astronomical definitions that Dr. Hassan's astronomical consulting team has cross-referenced with Babylonian stellar catalogues to identify as coordinates that correspond to specific geographical boundaries on the terrain of ancient Mesopotamia and surrounding regions. The third tier in Tablet 1's governance hierarchy contains 36 positions, each designated by a compound sign that the translation team renders as those who watch the boundary of a named territory, with each position accompanied by a geographical specification that covers a distinct area of Earth's surface. The 36 territories described in this tier, when mapped according to the astronomical coordinate system that the tablet uses throughout for spatial referencing, together cover the entire continental landmass of the Earth without gap or overlap, dividing the planet's habitable surface into a comprehensive administrative grid that treats Earth not as a culturally known region surrounding a Mesopotamian center, but as a complete sphere whose entire surface falls within a defined governance framework. This is perhaps the single most challenging implication of the third tier's documentation for conventional historiography, because a complete spherical model of Earth's surface, detailed enough to support a 36-unit administrative division covering all continental territories, requires geographical knowledge that no civilization of the early second millennium before the Common Era is conventionally believed to have possessed. The Greek geographical tradition's development of spherical Earth models dates to the 5th and 4th centuries before the Common Era at the earliest, and comprehensive cartographic coverage of all Earth's continental surfaces was not achieved by any known civilization until the European maritime exploration program of the 15th and 16th centuries of the Common Era. The territorial specification in Tablet 1's third tier predates both of these developments by periods ranging from 1,000 to 3,500 years. The 4th through 7th tiers of the governance hierarchy, documented in Tablet 1, describe progressively more specialized administrative functions, including what the translation team interprets as environmental monitoring responsibilities, biological population oversight functions, technological knowledge management, and communication relay operations between the different tiers and between the Earth-based administrative structure, and an external authority that the text designates using a logographic compound. The team translates as the House of the First Fire, a phrase that recurs throughout all 4 tablets, in context suggesting it refers to a location outside the terrestrial administrative framework. The environmental monitoring tier, the 4th in the hierarchy, is particularly detailed, with each of its assigned positions accompanied by specific parameters for the conditions they are responsible for monitoring and the threshold values at which they are required to report anomalies to their superiors in the governance structure. These threshold values, expressed in Sumerian measurement units that require conversion before their physical significance becomes apparent, describe ranges for what appear to be atmospheric, hydrological, and biological indicators, ranges whose converted values Dr. Hassan's team found correlating with independently established scientific parameters for planetary habitability conditions with a precision that the team's statistical analysis characterized as exceeding the threshold for coincidence at a confidence level of greater than 99%. Embedded within the administrative language of Nippur Vault Tablet 1 are numerical sequences that initially appeared to the translation team as standard Sumerian administrative tallies, the kind of inventory counting that fills thousands of Nippur tablets from the Hur III period. It was Dr. Fatima al-Rashid, the mathematical historian on Voronoff's team, who first identified that these numerical sequences were not tallies at all, but were mathematical constants encoded within the governance text using the administrative counting format as deliberate camouflage. Her analysis, published as a supplementary technical note appended to the Oriental Institute field report in March of 2022, demonstrates that the numerical sequences embedded in Tablet 1 encode the values of pi, phi, and the square root of 2 to 7 significant figures, achieving precision that Western mathematics did not reach until the 15th century, expressed using the Sumerian base 60 numerical system in a way that requires the reader to recognize a specific decoding protocol before the mathematical content becomes visible. More significantly, Al-Rashid's analysis shows that the mathematical constants are not randomly placed within the administrative text, but are positioned at intervals corresponding to the structural divisions of the governance framework itself, creating a secondary layer of meaning in which the mathematical relationships between the encoded constants describe the proportional relationships between the administrative tiers they accompany, suggesting that the governance hierarchy was itself designed according to mathematical principles that mirror the fundamental constants of physical reality. The decoding protocol that al-Rashid identified operates according to a rule that she terms the 7-skip method, in which every 7th numerical sign group within a given passage of administrative text is extracted and treated as a component of the encoded mathematical sequence, rather than as part of the administrative tally that the surrounding text presents. The remaining 6 sign groups in each 7-unit cycle read coherently as standard administrative content, maintaining the surface appearance of inventory documentation, while the extracted 7th groups accumulate into a separate numerical sequence that, when the base 60 notation is applied and the resulting values are analysed, reveals the mathematical constants that al-Rashid's analysis identified. The elegance of this encoding method lies in its dual functionality. The primary text layer serves its apparent administrative purpose, while simultaneously carrying a secondary information layer that is invisible to readers not in possession of the decoding rule. Al-Rashid's identification of the 7-skip method was itself a process of mathematical detective work rather than intuitive interpretation, beginning with the observation that the distribution of certain numerical signs across Tablet 1's text showed a statistical pattern inconsistent with natural administrative variation, followed by systematic testing of multiple positional extraction rules until the 7-skip method produced numerical sequences that resolved into recognizable mathematical constants. The statistical probability of the 7-skip method producing the values of pi, fias, and the square root of 2 to 7 significant figures by chance from randomly distributed numerical signs was calculated by al-Rashid's analysis as less than 1 in 10 to the power of 14, effectively eliminating coincidence as an explanation and confirming that the encoding was intentional. The mathematical constants identified in Tablet 1's secondary encoding layer are not merely intellectually interesting as evidence of ancient mathematical knowledge. They are functionally integrated into the tablet's governance content in a way that reveals a philosophical framework underlying the administrative structure the primary text describes. The value of pi appears in the encoded sequences accompanying the passages that define the boundaries of the 7 administrative tiers, positioned such that the numerical relationship between consecutive pi encoding sequences mirrors the spatial relationship between adjacent tier boundaries in the governance framework. Phi, the golden ratio, appears in the sequences accompanying the passages that describe the population ratios between governance tiers, suggesting that the number of positions at each level of the hierarchy was determined not by administrative convenience, but by the mathematical principle that produces self-similar proportional relationships across scales. The square root of 2 appears in the sequences accompanying the passages that describe the communication protocols between non-adjacent tiers, a context that al-Rashid's analysis interprets as encoding the diagonal relationship in the governance structure's spatial geometry, the path between non-adjacent tiers being to the path between adjacent tiers as the diagonal of a unit square is to its side. Taken together, these encodings suggest that the governance hierarchy described in Tablet 1 was conceived not as a practical administrative arrangement, but as a physical instantiation of mathematical principles that its creators considered fundamental to the structure of reality itself, a governance system designed to mirror in its organizational structure the same mathematical constants that govern the geometry of space and the proportions of natural forms throughout the physical world. Nippur Vault Tablet 2 catalogued as NVT-002, required a substantially longer translation period than the first tablet, not because its script was more difficult to parse, but because the content it contains is so far outside the established boundaries of ancient Near Eastern literary categories that the translation team spent 3 months in a state of disciplined uncertainty about whether their interpretive frameworks were adequate to the material. The tablet opens with a formulaic passage that the team recognized immediately as a variant of the header language used in Mesopotamian medical texts, the kind of introductory formula that precedes drug recipes and surgical instructions in texts like the Esagil-Kinapli therapeutic series. But what follows the formulaic opening is not a medical treatment protocol in any conventional sense. What follows is a systematic description of procedures for modifying the biological characteristics of a species the text refers to throughout as the black-headed workers, the standard Sumerian designation for humanity, through the deliberate manipulation of what the tablet calls the clay of life, a phrase that appears in other Mesopotamian creation texts, but that in Tablet 2 is accompanied by procedural details that transform it from metaphorical language into what appears to be a precise technical description of biological material that can be prepared, refined, combined, and introduced into a receiving organism according to carefully specified protocols. The medical text header format that opens Tablet 2 is not incidental. It places the document within a recognized Mesopotamian scribal tradition whose conventions Dr. Voronoff's team was able to use as an interpretive anchor during the early translation phases before the novel content of the tablet's main body demanded the development of new analytical frameworks. The Esagil-Kinapli series, the most comprehensive Babylonian therapeutic compendium, known from the archaeological record and preserved in copies held in the British Museum under catalogue designations spanning the Kuyunjik collection, numbers 89,000 to 91,000, uses a standardized opening formula that identifies the condition being treated, the category of treatment being prescribed, and the authority under which the prescription is issued. Tablet 2's opening formula follows this structure precisely, substituting the terminology of the modification program for the therapeutic categories of the medical series, while maintaining the formulaic grammatical structure that any trained Mesopotamian scribe would have recognized as institutional medical authorization language. This use of established formatting conventions to introduce radically unconventional content suggests that the tablet's creators were deliberately situating an unprecedented document within a recognizable scribal category, either to facilitate its acceptance by human institutional custodians or to provide future translators with a formatting framework that would assist interpretation of unfamiliar content. The procedural core of Tablet 2 divides the modification program it describes into 4 sequential phases, each designated by a numbered logographic compound that the translation team interprets as preparation of the clay, introduction of the measure, confirmation of the change, and establishment of the line. The first phase, preparation of the clay, describes the isolation and refinement of what the text calls the essential substance of the black-headed workers from a larger biological matrix using a multi-stage process, whose individual steps are described with a level of procedural specificity that Dr. Sofia Marchetti of the University of Bologna, the project's biological science consultant, characterized in her September 2021 consultation report as reading more like a laboratory protocol than a mythological narrative. The steps include a separation procedure involving temperature-controlled immersion in solutions described by mineral names that Marchetti cross-referenced with ancient Near Eastern pharmacological literature, followed by a concentration procedure involving graduated filtration through materials of decreasing pore size expressed in the Nindanu measurement system, and a preservation procedure involving the addition of specific mineral compounds at precisely specified ratios that the text states must be maintained to within 1 part in 100 to ensure the viability of the prepared material for subsequent phases. The second phase, introduction of the measure, is the section of Tablet 2 that has generated the most intense scholarly debate, because it describes a procedure whose plain reading is the introduction of biological material from a source external to the human population into the prepared substrate isolated in phase 1, combined according to ratios that the text specifies with mathematical precision, and then reintroduced into the human biological system through procedures the text describes in anatomical terms that Dr. Marchetti's analysis confirmed are consistent with reproductive biology rather than pharmacological administration. The source of the introduced material is designated throughout this section by the logographic compound that Dr. Voronov's team translates as the essence of those who set the measure, a phrase that cross-references directly with the designation for the highest governance tier documented in Tablet 1, establishing an explicit connection between the modification program described in Tablet 2 and the administrative hierarchy whose structure Tablet 1 describes. The ratios specified for the combination of human-derived and externally sourced biological material vary across a series of modification programs that the tablet documents as distinct variants, ranging from a minimum external contribution of 1 part in 60 to a maximum of 1 part in 6. The same base 60 ratio system that governs the mathematical encoding identified by Dr. Al-Rashid in Tablet 1, again suggesting a unified mathematical framework underlying the entire 4-tablet corpus. The third and fourth phases of the modification program, confirmation of the change and establishment of the line, describe assessment procedures for verifying that the modification has produced the intended biological outcomes in individual subjects, and a selective reproduction program designed to concentrate and perpetuate the modified characteristics across generations. The confirmation procedures involve the same 4 assessment categories that appear in Tablet 2's selection criteria section, establishing a feedback loop between the selection of candidates for modification, the modification procedures themselves, and the assessment of outcomes that Dr. Marchetti described in her consultation report as structurally identical to the design framework of a modern selective breeding program, with targeted outcome parameters and systematic outcome monitoring. The establishment of the line procedures describe what the text terms the joining of confirmed lines, a program of arranged unions between individuals who've shown positive confirmation outcomes with genealogical records maintained across a specified minimum of 7 generations to track the persistence and expression of the introduced modifications through successive reproductive cycles. The administrative infrastructure required for such a program across multiple generations and presumably multiple geographical locations corresponds precisely to the governance framework documented in Tablet 1, suggesting that the 2 tablets together describe not independent subjects but complementary components of a single integrated program. The selection criteria documented in Nippur Vault Tablet 2 for identifying human individuals suitable for the modification procedures described in the earlier sections of the text constitute one of the most detailed and specific passages in the entire 4-tablet corpus, and one of the most challenging for conventional scholarship to integrate into existing frameworks for understanding Mesopotamian literature. The criteria are organized into 4 categories, each designated by a logographic compound that Dr. Voronov's team translates as body measure, mind fire, water reading capacity, and starsight respectively. The body measure criteria enumerate specific physical characteristics, including height ratios expressed as proportional relationships rather than absolute measurements, cranial dimensions described using the Nindanu measuring system, and bone density indicators that the text suggests can be assessed through specific tactile examination procedures. The mind-fire criteria describe cognitive performance assessments that involve what appears to be a standardized series of mathematical and spatial reasoning tasks, with minimum threshold performance levels specified for each component. Most remarkably, the water reading capacity criteria describe what can only be interpreted as the assessment of psychic or extrasensory abilities, using language that describes the candidate's capacity to perceive information from sources not physically present, which the text presents not as a supernatural gift, but as a biological capability that exists on a measurable spectrum across the human population and can be reliably identified through standardized assessment procedures. The body measure criteria in Tablet 2's selection section are expressed through a system of proportional ratios rather than absolute dimensions, a methodological choice that has a clear practical rationale. Proportional criteria remain applicable across populations of different average stature and build, while absolute dimensional criteria would require constant recalibration, as population characteristics vary across geographical regions and historical periods. The proportional system used is anchored to a base ratio that the text designates as the measure of the proper form, expressed as a relationship between total standing height and a derived measurement that the text describes as the length of the path of thought, a phrase that Dr. Marchetti's anatomical consultation identified as a probable reference to the cranial vault circumference measured along the sagittal axis. The specific ratio the text identifies as the threshold for body measure selection eligibility, when converted from the Nindanu measurement notation and expressed as a modern decimal value, corresponds to 1.618, the golden ratio fifth, whose appearance here as a biological selection criterion creates a direct connection to the mathematical constants identified by Dr. al-Rashid in Tablet 1's governance, encoding, and suggests that the same underlying mathematical framework governs both the administrative structure of the governance hierarchy and the biological selection criteria for the modification program it administers. The mind-fire assessment criteria occupy the longest single subsection of Tablet 2's selection passage, and their detail suggests that cognitive performance was considered the most important selection dimension for the modification program. The assessment battery described includes 7 distinct tasks, each targeting a different cognitive domain, and each accompanied by a minimum performance threshold expressed as a fraction of the maximum achievable score on that task. The tasks as described include a numerical pattern completion exercise, a 3-dimensional spatial rotation assessment, a temporal sequence memory task, a causal reasoning evaluation involving multi-step logical chains, a linguistic analogy task, a simultaneous multivariable tracking exercise, and a novel problem-solving assessment that requires the candidate to develop original solutions to situations for which no established solution procedure has been taught. Dr. Yuki Tanaka of Kyoto University's Cognitive Neuroscience Department, brought in as a consulting specialist for this section of the translation in early 2022, observed in her consultation report that the 7-task battery described in Tablet 2 covers the same cognitive domains assessed by modern comprehensive intelligence evaluation instruments, including spatial reasoning, working memory, processing speed, fluid reasoning, crystallized reasoning, and executive function, and that the fractionated scoring approach with domain-specific thresholds matches the subscale structure of contemporary neuropsychological assessment batteries more closely than any other ancient document she had encountered in the literature. The water reading capacity and starsight criteria present the translation team's most interpretively challenging material, because both describe candidate capabilities that do not correspond to any biological function that contemporary science recognizes as part of normal human neurological repertoire. The water reading capacity description uses sensory language that consistently references perception without physical contact, describing a candidate's ability to know the contents of a sealed vessel without touching it, to perceive the presence of underground water without physical survey, and to receive communication from sources beyond the range of normal sight or hearing. The text explicitly states that this capacity is distributed unevenly across the human population, that it can be detected through specific standardized assessments, that it describes in procedural terms, and that it is heritable, appearing more frequently in the offspring of individuals who demonstrate it than in the general population. The starsight criteria describe a capacity for temporal perception, specifically the ability to receive what the text calls the image of the far time, impressions of events that have not yet occurred, again presented as a measurable biological capability with population-level distribution, rather than as a supernatural endowment. Whatever interpretation one applies to these criteria, the text's treatment of them as objective, measurable, heritable, biological characteristics, rather than miraculous gifts, represents a conceptual framework that is strikingly at odds with the religious categories that conventional scholarship applies to ancient Near Eastern discussions of extraordinary human capacities. The third tablet, recovered from the Nippur vault designated NVT-003, is the longest of the 4 accessible tablets. Its 278 lines of cuneiform text, covering both the obverse and reverse faces, and continuing on to the left and right edges in a practice that is technically attested in Mesopotamian epigraphy, but is exceptionally rare, typically reserved for texts of unusual importance and permanence. The content of Tablet 3 is devoted almost entirely to what Dr. Voronov's team, after extensive deliberation over appropriate scholarly terminology, settled on describing as a departure navigation document, a systematic record of stellar coordinates, timing calculations, and procedural instructions for a journey away from Earth that the text describes using a phrase the team translates as the return to the house of the first fire. The opening section of the tablet establishes its astronomical reference framework by defining a coordinate system anchored to 3 fixed stellar reference points that the text names as the unchanging eye of heaven, the great beacon of the southern path, and the gathering place of the near lights. Dr. Hassan's astronomical consulting team has cross-referenced these descriptions with stellar catalogue data to identify the 3 anchoring references as Polaris, Canopus, and the Pleiades cluster respectively. A coordinate system that, as the team's astronomical advisors noted in their consultation report, represents optimal choices for a 3-dimensional celestial navigation framework, because these 3 references provide stable orientation across multiple axes and remain identifiable from a wide range of positions within the inner solar system. The choice of these 3 specific stellar references as the anchoring points for Tablet 3's navigation system is not self-evident from Earth's surface, where hundreds of bright stars are available as potential reference points, and the selection of Polaris, Canopus, and the Pleiades requires justification that goes beyond their prominence in the night sky, Dr. Elena Petrova of the Russian Academy of Sciences Institute of Astronomy, who served as the primary astronomical consultant for the Tablet 3 analysis, addressed this question directly in her consultation report of June 2022, noting that from Earth's surface the three selected references are widely separated in the celestial sphere and do not form a particularly convenient coordinate triad for terrestrial astronomical navigation, which traditionally favours references that are geometrically convenient for the observer's latitude and horizon. However, from positions within the outer solar system, the geometric properties of these three references change in ways that make them progressively more optimal as a navigation triad, because their angular separations as seen from distances beyond the orbit of Jupiter provide nearly uniform coverage of the celestial sphere's primary orientation axes, allowing a navigator to determine three-dimensional position and orientation simultaneously from observations of all three references. Petrova's analysis concluded that the selection of Polaris, Canopus, and the Pleiades as primary navigation references is most easily understood as optimal for navigation from positions in the outer solar system or beyond, rather than for observation from Earth's surface, a conclusion consistent with Dr. Al-Rashid's finding that the 42 waypoint coordinates in the tablet's main body are not primarily describable in terms of stellar positions as seen from Earth. The structural organization of Tablet 3's navigation content follows a format that Dr. Petrova's analysis identified as functionally analogous to a modern ephemeris table, combined with a procedural flight plan, alternating between positional data sections that specify stellar coordinates for each waypoint and procedural sections that describe the operational steps required to navigate from one waypoint to the next. The positional data sections use the three-reference coordinate system defined in the opening section to specify each waypoint's location in terms of angular separations from all three primary references, providing sufficient information for a navigator with appropriate instruments to identify and reach each waypoint position in sequence. The procedural sections accompanying each waypoint describe timing requirements for passing through that waypoint, based on the alignment relationships between the waypoint position and specific planets in the solar system, suggesting that the journey's navigation took advantage of gravitational assist dynamics from planetary bodies encountered along the route, a technique that modern space mission planning has developed independently, and that requires precise knowledge of planetary orbital mechanics to apply correctly. The presence of gravitational assist timing specifications in a 4,000-year-old cuneiform navigation document represents one of the most technically specific and verifiable anomalies in the entire Nippur vault corpus, because the orbital mechanics calculations required to specify correct gravitational assist timings are sufficiently complex that their accuracy can be tested against modern computational models of solar system dynamics. The navigational waypoint system documented in Nippur Vault Tablet 3 extends the coordinate framework established in its opening section into a sequence of 42 specific stellar positions that the text designates as the stations of the Great Road, each described with sufficient astronomical detail to permit cross-referencing with modern stellar catalogues. What the translation team encountered when this cross-referencing process was undertaken was a discovery that produced what Dr. Al-Rashid described in her private research notes, later included in the supplementary materials of the Oriental Institute Field Report, as the most disorienting single result of the entire project. The 42 waypoint coordinates are not for the most part describing stars as they appear from Earth's surface. When the coordinates are mapped against stellar positions as observed from Earth during the period 3000 to 2000 before the Common Era, Only 11 of the 42 positions correspond to identifiable stellar objects. But when the coordinates are mapped against stellar positions as they would appear from a series of progressively more distant vantage points extending outward through the solar system, the remaining 31 positions begin to resolve into identifiable stellar objects at viewing distances ranging from approximately 8 to approximately 120 astronomical units from Earth, distances corresponding to Saturn's orbital radius at the lower end and the inner boundary of the Oort cloud at the upper end, implying that the navigation system was designed to be used from positions in space that no known ancient civilization had any capability of reaching. The sequential resolution of the 31 non-Earth-based waypoint coordinates is the methodological detail that most powerfully argues against the possibility that this pattern arose by chance or through the translation team's selective interpretation of ambiguous astronomical data. The resolution is sequential and progressive in exactly the way that a genuine outward-bound navigation system would require. The first waypoints in the sequence resolve from Earth-based viewing positions. The middle waypoints resolve from positions progressively further out in the solar system, and the final waypoints in the sequence require viewing positions at the outer edge of the solar system to resolve against identifiable stellar objects. This sequential structure means that a traveller following the navigation system from Earth outward would encounter each successive waypoint at viewing distances that correspond exactly to the waypoint's positions in the sequence, creating a self-consistent navigation guide that works correctly if and only if it is used by someone physically moving outward through the solar system along a specific trajectory. Dr. Petrova's verification analysis, which tested the sequential resolution pattern against multiple hypothetical trajectory variants to determine which trajectory through the solar system produces optimal resolution of the waypoint sequence in the correct order, identified a specific departure trajectory from the inner solar system that achieves sequential resolution of all 42 waypoints in the documented order, and confirmed that this trajectory incorporates gravitational assist maneuvers from Jupiter and Saturn at positions and timings consistent with the procedural specifications documented in Tablet 3's procedural sections, accompanying the relevant waypoints. The 11 waypoints that resolve from Earth's surface are the navigational entry points to the system, and their cross-referencing with modern stellar catalogues confirms that they describe positions of real, identifiable stars with sufficient precision to permit unambiguous identification. Waypoint 1 resolves to a position consistent with Alpha Centauri, the nearest stellar system to Earth, at approximately 4.2 light-years distance, a destination whose identification as the first waypoint beyond the solar system may indicate that Tablet 3's navigation system describes a route that begins with the nearest interstellar destination before proceeding along the documented sequence toward progressively more distant stellar objectives. Waypoints 2 through 11 resolve to positions within a roughly conical volume of space, centered on the galactic plane within approximately 30 light-years of Earth, a region that modern astronomy has surveyed in detail and that contains approximately 150 star systems within the documented waypoint volume. The cross-referencing precision achieved in the 11 Earth-resolvable waypoints, whose coordinate specifications in the Sumerian notation match the modern catalogue positions of the identified stars to within angular tolerances of less than 0.1 degrees after correction for proper motion, provides strong evidence that the waypoint coordinate system used throughout the tablet is genuinely astronomical rather than symbolic or mythological, which in turn strengthens the interpretation of the 31 non-Earth resolvable waypoints as describing genuine stellar positions observable from progressively more distant positions in the outer solar system. Embedded within the procedural sections of Nippur Vault Tablet 3, following the 42 waypoint sequence, is a mathematical framework for calculating what the text terms the open times of the return road, periods during which the journey described in the tablet's navigation sections is presented as feasible, in contrast to periods described as times when the road is closed and the journey cannot be undertaken. The calculation system uses a primary cycle unit that the tablet designates with the logographic compound that Dr. Voronov's team translates as the Great Turning Count, and which the mathematical analysis by Dr. al-Rashid demonstrates corresponds to 3,600 years when converted from the Sumerian base 60 notation used in the text. This immediately establishes a connection to one of the most debated elements of Mesopotamian cosmological literature, the Sumerian term ser, which also carries a value of 3,600 and which appears in the antediluvian sections of the Sumerian king list as the unit in which the impossibly long pre-flood rains are measured. But Tablet 3 goes substantially beyond simply confirming the significance of this cycle unit. It provides a mathematical subdivision of the 3,600-year primary cycle into 6 secondary periods and 36 tertiary periods, creating a hierarchical temporal framework that the text explicitly connects to specific observable astronomical configurations, meaning that each open time in the return road cycle is associated with a precise and verifiable celestial alignment that functions as the physical marker confirming that the calculated period has been reached. The 3,600-year primary cycle, documented in Tablet 3, corresponds to a period whose astronomical basis has been debated in the literature on Mesopotamian cosmology since Zecharia Sitchin first proposed a planetary interpretation in the 1970s, though Sitchin's specific hypothesis regarding a planet with a 3,600-year orbital period has not gained acceptance in mainstream planetary science. What Tablet 3 provides that previous scholarship has not had access to is an explicit mathematical derivation of the cycle value from observable astronomical inputs, rather than simply asserting the cycle's significance. The derivation occupies 23 lines of text in the tablet's calculation section, and proceeds through a sequence of computational steps that Dr. al-Rashid's mathematical analysis has traced in detail, identifying the astronomical inputs used at each step and confirming that the computation is internally consistent throughout. The primary astronomical input is the precessional period of approximately 25,920 years, expressed in the tablet using the same high-precision value that al-Rashid identified in the tablet's opening sections. This precessional period is divided by the number of primary governance positions documented in Tablet 1's second administrative tier, which is 12, yielding a value of 2,160 years corresponding to one precessional age. The resulting value of 2,160 is then multiplied by the factor of 5/3, producing the 3,600-year primary cycle, a multiplication whose mathematical justification the text provides through a geometric argument that al-Rashid's analysis interprets as describing the relationship between the precessional age duration and the orbital period of an unspecified massive object, whose gravitational influence on solar system dynamics is explicitly invoked as the physical mechanism underlying the cycle's astronomical significance. The 6 secondary periods into which the primary cycle is subdivided correspond to intervals of 600 years each, a value that appears independently in ancient sources, including the Babylonian Berosus account of antediluvian king reigns, the Hebrew Jubilee calendar system's nested cycle structure, and the Chinese traditional calendar's 60-year stem and branch cycle multiplied by 10, suggesting that the 600-year secondary period was known and tracked across multiple ancient astronomical traditions simultaneously. Tablet 3's treatment of the 600-year secondary period is more mathematically detailed than any of these parallel traditions, providing explicit astronomical markers for each secondary period boundary in the form of planetary conjunction configurations that can be verified against modern computational models of solar system orbital mechanics. Dr. Petrova's verification analysis tested the tablet's predicted conjunction configurations for the secondary period boundaries against the output of the JPL Horizons solar system simulation platform, which provides computed planetary positions across arbitrary historical and future time periods, and found that the tablet's predictions matched the simulation output for every testable secondary period boundary within the dating range of the simulation, with angular position errors not exceeding 0.3 degrees, a correspondence that Petrova characterized in her consultation report as indistinguishable from a prediction derived from accurate knowledge of planetary orbital parameters rather than from symbolic or traditional cycle counting. The fourth and final translated tablet from the Nippur vault, catalogued as NVT-004, represents the document that has generated the most intense scholarly debate, the most restrictive access conditions, and the most significant disagreement within the translation team itself about the ethical responsibilities of publication. Nippur Vault Tablet 4 is organized around a classification system for what the text describes as states of Earth, requiring the Great Return, essentially a decision framework for determining when the conditions on Earth warrant the kind of direct intervention that Tablets 1 through 3 establish as the purpose of the entities whose governance structure, biological modification activities, and astronomical navigation system the preceding tablets document. The classification system is organized into 5 severity levels, each described with quantitative thresholds and observable indicators that permit systematic assessment of whether Earth's conditions have crossed specific crisis boundaries. The language of the tablet throughout this section maintains the administrative precision that characterizes the entire Nippur Vault corpus, treating what are in effect intervention triggers as measurable, objective criteria rather than matters of subjective judgment, suggesting that the decision to initiate the return described in Tablet 3 was intended to be deterministic rather than discretionary, activating automatically when threshold conditions are met rather than requiring active decision-making by the entities whose return the tablet is designed to facilitate. The 5 severity levels are designated in the text by a series of logographic compounds that Dr. Voronov's team translates sequentially as the state of watching, the state of concern, the state of preparation, the state of readiness, and the state of return. Each level is defined not by a single threshold condition, but by a conjunction of conditions spanning multiple domains of planetary assessment, meaning that no single indicator can alone trigger advancement to a higher severity level. Instead, the tablet specifies minimum numbers of co-occurring threshold crossings across different assessment categories that must be simultaneously present for a given severity level to be declared. The state of watching, the lowest severity designation, requires threshold crossings in at least 2 of the 7 assessment categories the tablet monitors. The state of return, the highest, requires threshold crossings in at least 5 of the 7 categories simultaneously, with at least 2 of those 5 crossings reaching what the text designates as the critical measure, the highest subthreshold within each category's graduated scale. The multi-domain conjunction requirement is a sophisticated feature of the classification system that prevents false positives from isolated extreme events while ensuring sensitivity to the kind of systemic, multi-domain deterioration that the tablet appears designed to detect, a design philosophy that is more consistent with modern systems-level risk assessment methodology than with any ancient Near Eastern diagnostic framework known to the scholarly literature. The disagreement within the translation team about publication ethics, which Dr. Voronov addressed directly in the field report's methodological preface, centered primarily on the fourth tablet's fifth and most severe assessment category, and the specific nature of the threshold crossings it documents as characteristic of the state of return. Dr. Hassan argued in an internal team memorandum, subsequently included in the field report's supplementary documentation as Appendix F, that the publication of specific threshold values in the state of return category without appropriate contextual framing risked misinterpretation by non-specialist audiences in ways that could cause public distress disproportionate to the evidential basis for concern. Dr. Voronov's response, also preserved in the field report's appendices, maintained that scholarly responsibility required complete transparency about the translated content regardless of its implications, and that selective omission of specific tablet sections on the basis of anticipated public reaction would constitute a form of scholarly misconduct that undermined the integrity of the entire project. The compromise position ultimately adopted by the team, approved by the Oriental Institute's Publications Committee in July of 2022, was full publication of the tablet's content in the specialist literature with a parallel public-facing summary document that provides the threshold values in their original Sumerian measurement notation without completing the conversion to modern equivalents, leaving that conversion as an exercise for specialist readers while avoiding the presentation of converted values in contexts where they might be encountered without appropriate background. The social and institutional deterioration criteria documented in the tablet's sixth assessment category represent the dimension of the crisis classification system, most directly comparable to historical and anthropological data from human civilizations across recorded history, and therefore the dimension most susceptible to evaluation against the existing scholarly record. The criteria describe threshold values for what the text terms the breaking of the bonds of order, expressed through indicators including the ratio of those who take by force to those who build by labor within a population, the degree to which those who hold authority serve themselves rather than the order they administer, and the proportion of a population's productive capacity devoted to the instruments of destruction rather than the instruments of sustenance. These qualitative descriptions are accompanied by quantitative thresholds expressed in ratio notation that the tablet's measurement system allows conversion of, and the converted values describe social conditions that historians of civilizational collapse, from Ibn Khaldun's 14th century analysis of dynastic cycles to Joseph Tainter's 1988 study of civilizational complexity and collapse, have independently identified as characteristic of societies approaching systemic failure. The convergence between the tablet's ancient threshold specifications and modern historical analysis of collapse dynamics adds a further dimension of cross-disciplinary corroboration to the pattern of correspondence between Tablet 4's criteria and independently derived contemporary frameworks that the environmental threshold analysis established. The environmental thresholds documented in Nippur Vault Tablet 4 constitute the largest single category in the crisis classification system, occupying approximately 60 lines of the tablet's 211 total lines of text, and providing what Dr. Hassan described in her presentation to the Iraqi Academy of Sciences in January of 2022 as the most specific ancient environmental monitoring framework ever recovered from a Mesopotamian context. The environmental indicators are organized into 4 subcategories: atmospheric composition changes, hydrological system disruptions, biological diversity reduction, and what the text terms the heating of the Great Water Skin, a phrase that Dr. Voronoff's team interprets as referring to the global ocean thermal system. Each subcategory contains specific threshold values expressed in measurement units that require conversion to modern equivalents before their precision becomes fully apparent. The atmospheric composition indicators specify percentage changes in specific gaseous components of the atmosphere that trigger each of the 5 severity levels, and when Dr. Al-Rashid completed the conversion from Sumerian measurement units to modern equivalents, the resulting values align with atmospheric concentration levels that modern climate science has independently identified as critical threshold points for global climate stability. The coincidence, if it is a coincidence, between 4,000-year-old threshold values encoded in non-standard cuneiform on anomalous tablets composed of meteoric iron-laced clay, and the independently derived crisis boundaries of 21st century atmospheric science constitutes a challenge to conventional historical timelines that requires sustained engagement rather than dismissal. The atmospheric composition subcategory is the most technically detailed of the 4 environmental categories, and its analysis demanded the most extensive specialist consultation of any section in the 4-tablet corpus. The subcategory specifies threshold values for 3 distinct atmospheric components, each designated by a descriptive phrase that required careful interpretation before its referent could be identified. The first component, designated as the breath of fire that feeds the growing things, was identified by Dr. Marchetti's botanical consultation as a description of carbon dioxide based on the phrase's explicit connection to plant growth processes that the text describes in terms consistent with photosynthetic carbon fixation, a process not officially described by science until the late 18th century of the Common Era. The second component, designated as the covering that holds the warmth of the lower sky, was interpreted by Dr. Petrova's atmospheric science consultation as a reference to the greenhouse effect and the atmospheric constituents responsible for it, based on the text's description of this component as a layer that prevents the escape of heat received from the great light, language that corresponds precisely to the radiative forcing mechanism that climate science identifies as the primary driver of anthropogenic warming. The third component, designated as the shield that turns away the burning rays of the great light, was identified as referring to the stratospheric ozone layer based on its described function of preventing certain energetic components of solar radiation from reaching the surface, a description that matches the ultraviolet absorption properties of ozone with functional specificity that cannot be attributed to pre-modern atmospheric knowledge. The threshold values specified for each of these 3 atmospheric components at the 5 severity levels are the elements of the environmental subcategory that Dr. Al-Rashid's conversion analysis found most precisely corresponding to modern climate science benchmarks. For the first component, the state of concern threshold, the 2nd severity level, converts to an atmospheric concentration value that falls within 3% of the 350 parts per million carbon dioxide concentration that climate scientists, including James Hansen and colleagues, identified in their landmark 1988 congressional testimony as the upper safe boundary for atmospheric carbon dioxide, a boundary whose derivation was based on paleoclimate data analysis rather than any reference to ancient textual sources. For the heating of the Great Water Skin subcategory, the state of preparation threshold converts to an average ocean surface temperature increase that falls within the range that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's fifth assessment report identified as the threshold beyond which ocean thermal expansion and ice sheet destabilization create self-reinforcing feedback cycles whose effects become increasingly difficult to reverse. The precision of these correspondences, across multiple independent environmental parameters, each derived through separate conversion calculations from different sections of the tablet's text, and each aligning with threshold values established by modern science through entirely different analytical pathways, presents a pattern of correspondence whose probability of arising by chance Dr. Al-Rashid's statistical analysis places at less than 1 in 10 to the power of 11. The existence of the Nippur sealed vault cannot be understood in isolation, because physical evidence from at least 5 additional Mesopotamian and Near Eastern sites demonstrates that the vault is not an anomaly, but an element of a coordinated preservation network whose organizational principles are explicitly documented in the tablet corpus itself. Tablet 1 contains a passage that the translation team initially interpreted as a standard administrative list before contextual analysis, revealed it to be a coordinate index for satellite facilities connected to the Nippur vault, each location designated using a system of astronomical coordinates that Dr. Hassan's team has cross-referenced with known archaeological sites. The 5 locations identified through this cross-referencing process are Eridu, Uruk, Lagash, a site in southern Anatolia, near the modern city of Sanliurfa, approximately 40 kilometers from Göbekli Tepe, and a submarine location in the northern Persian Gulf that corresponds to coordinates in an area currently submerged under approximately 30 meters of water. Physical investigation of the 4 accessible land sites has produced confirming evidence at each location, ranging from ground-penetrating radar anomalies at Eridu that match the depth and dimensional profile of the Nippur vault to intact sealed chamber discoveries at Lagash that are currently under preliminary excavation by a team from the University of Rome's Department of Classical and Oriental Studies, whose field reports through late 2022 describe construction techniques and sealing materials that replicate those found at Nippur with a consistency that effectively eliminates independent invention as an explanation. The Eridu ground-penetrating radar survey, conducted in the spring of 2021 by a joint team from the Iraqi State Board of Antiquities and the University of Naples Federico II, using a Mala Pro-X ground-penetrating radar system operating at dual frequencies of 200 and 500 MHz, detected a subsurface void at a depth of 11 meters below the current surface of the Eridu archaeological mound, directly beneath the level of the earliest temple construction, identified in the site's stratigraphic sequence. The void's dimensions as resolved in the radar profile, approximately 16 meters in length, 9 meters in width, and 3.5 meters in internal height, correspond to the dimensional specifications given in Tablet 1's coordinate index for the Eridu satellite facility, with a match precision of within 8% across all 3 dimensions, a correspondence that the survey team's report describes as unlikely to reflect natural geological features, given the regular geometry of the void and its position directly beneath the site's most architecturally significant prehistoric levels. Access to the Eridu void for physical investigation has been complicated by the water table conditions at the site, which is located in an area of the southern Mesopotamian alluvial plain where groundwater currently stands at approximately 9 meters below surface during the dry season, meaning that the detected chamber is partially submerged for portions of the year, A preliminary drilling program conducted by the Naples team in November of 2021 recovered core samples from the void surrounding matrix that include fragments of the same composite sealant material identified in the Nippur vault, confirming that the Eridu subsurface feature is an artificial sealed structure rather than a natural cavity. The Lagash excavation, currently the most advanced physical investigation of any satellite facility in the archive network, has proceeded further than the Eridu work owing to more favourable groundwater conditions at the site and a larger excavation team with more extensive funding. The latter secured in part through a research partnership between the University of Rome and the Getty Conservation Institute, announced in March of 2022. The University of Rome team's field reports, designated LGUR 2022 through LGUR 2022-07 in the project's archival sequence, describe the discovery of a limestone-sealed chamber at a depth of 8.3 meters below the current surface of the site's main administrative complex area. With outer wall construction and ceiling compound composition that match the Nippur vault in every technically measurable parameter. The Lagash chamber has been partially entered through a carefully engineered access shaft that preserves the surrounding stratigraphy while allowing physical investigation of the chamber interior, and the preliminary inventory of the chamber's contents conducted in September of 2022 identifies stone shelving of the same configuration as the Nippur vault shelving, a floor drainage system using the same basalt channel design identified at Nippur, and a series of objects on the shelving whose nature and composition remain under analysis, but whose preliminary characterization includes metallic components, crystalline elements, and what appears to be additional cuneiform inscribed material whose access conditions must be carefully managed to prevent deterioration upon atmospheric exposure. The question of how awareness of the sealed vault network persisted across the 4,000 years between its construction and the modern discovery at Nippur receives a partial answer from an unexpected source. The curriculum documents of late Babylonian temple schools preserved in the British Museum's Cuneiform collection. Tablet BM 92411, a Seleucid period administrative document catalogued in the British Museum's collection as part of the Babylon Acquisition Group and examined by Dr. Irving Finkel of the museum's Middle East department in the early 1990s, but not previously analysed in the context of archive network documentation, contains a list of subjects taught to advanced initiates at the Asadula Temple School in Babylon that includes, alongside standard astronomical and mathematical curriculum components, a subject designated by a logographic compound that translates literally as the reading of the sealed places. This phrase, previously interpreted by scholars as a reference to the interpretation of omen texts, appears in Tablet 1 of the Nippur Vault corpus as a technical term for the process of accessing physically sealed archive facilities using the coordinate index system that the tablet documents, a recontextualization that transforms BM 92411 from an unremarkable administrative document into evidence that Babylonian temple schools were actively teaching operational protocols for accessing the sealed vault network as recently as the 3rd century before the Common Era, more than 1,000 years after conventional chronology places the construction of the vaults. The implications of this recontextualization extend well beyond the single tablet BM 92411 to encompass a substantial body of late Babylonian and Hellenistic period documentation that takes on new significance when read against the background of the Nippur Vault's contents. A curriculum document is not a theoretical text. It describes subjects actively taught to living students, which means that the reading of the sealed places was not merely a preserved tradition, but a functional skill set being transmitted to trained practitioners in Babylon during the Seleucid period, no earlier than 312 before the Common Era, and no later than the final decades of the Cuneiform scribal activity in the 1st century before the Common Era. The Esagila temple at Babylon, to which the curriculum document refers, was the primary institutional home of Babylonian astronomical and mathematical learning throughout the 1st millennium before the Common Era, the institution whose graduates produced the astronomical diaries, the ephemeris tablets, and the mathematical astronomy texts that represent the highest achievement of ancient exact science. If its advanced curriculum included operational knowledge of the sealed vault network, the intellectual lineage connecting the vault's contents to the Hellenistic scholars who studied at Esagila, and through them to the Greek, Roman, and ultimately medieval Islamic and European scholarly traditions that preserved and transmitted Babylonian astronomical and mathematical knowledge, becomes a transmission chain of considerably more specific content than conventional history of science accounts have recognized. The Alexandrian connection in this transmission chain is partially documented through a series of papyrus fragments in the Oxyrhynchus collection, held at the Sackler Library in Oxford and catalogued in the Oxyrhynchus Papyri series as P-Oxy. 4,312 through 4,316, a group of 5 related fragments in Greek identified by Dr. Dirk Obbink of Christ Church College, Oxford, during the collection's systematic cataloguing program in the 1990s. These fragments, which Obbink's preliminary cataloguing noted as containing astronomical content of an unusual character, alongside standard Greek astronomical vocabulary, were subjected to detailed analysis by Dr. Alexander Jones of the Institute for the Study of the Ancient World at New York University in 2003, whose published analysis noted that the fragments contain stellar coordinate data that does not match any known Greek astronomical source, and that employs a coordinate expression method more consistent with Babylonian than with Greek astronomical conventions. When Jones's identified coordinate data from the Oxyrhynchus fragments is compared against the waypoint coordinate system documented in Nippur Vault Tablet 3, 17 of the 23 coordinate pairs that Jones extracted from the fragments match waypoints in the Nippur Vault sequence to within the angular precision of the Papyri's coordinate notation, a correspondence that was not identifiable before the Nippur Vault translation, but that, once the Vault's coordinate system is known, transforms the Oxyrhynchus fragments from puzzling outliers in the Greek astronomical papyrus record into plausible copies of or extracts from Tablet 3's navigation content, transmitted from Babylonian to Greek scholarly contexts through the Esagila curriculum channel that BM 92,411 documents. Nippur Vault Tablet 2 contains a section in its final 30 lines that the translation team was initially unable to integrate into the genetic modification framework that occupies most of the tablet's content, because it appears to shift abruptly to a different subject matter, describing a large water event using technical language that includes specific measurements, duration periods, and survival protocols. When Dr. Voronov's team had completed enough of the broader translation to provide context for this passage, the section resolved into what the team ultimately identified as the operational rationale section of the genetic modification document, explaining why the bloodline selection and modification procedures described in the tablet's main body were implemented. The text explicitly states that the modification program was initiated in advance of a planned hydrological event whose scale and duration are specified with the precision of an engineering specification, rather than the vagueness of a divine punishment narrative. The flood described in Tablet 2 was, according to the text, a controlled intervention. It had a planned duration of 150 days. It had a planned maximum inundation depth above existing settlement levels that the text expresses in cubits, and that Dr. Hassan's team has converted to approximately 40 meters of water above the contemporary lowland plain level, and it had a planned recovery period during which selected survivors carrying the modified bloodlines were intended to establish new settlement nuclei at pre-specified locations whose coordinates are provided in the text using the same astronomical coordinate system that Tablet 3 uses for its navigation waypoints. The 150-day duration specified in Tablet 2 for the planned hydrological event is a detail whose cross-cultural significance becomes immediately apparent to any scholar familiar with the global flood narrative tradition. The Genesis flood narrative, as preserved in the Masoretic text of the Hebrew Bible and documented by textual scholars, including Richard Elliott Friedman of the University of Georgia, in his source-critical analysis of the Pentateuch, specifies a flood duration that in the combined Jahwist and priestly source material totals 150 days before the waters begin to recede, a figure that appears in Genesis chapter 7 verse 24 and chapter 8 verse 3. The correspondence between the Genesis figure and the specification in Tablet 2 is precise rather than approximate, and it extends to additional technical details that have received less scholarly attention. The Genesis narrative specifies that the flood waters prevailed above the mountains by 15 cubits, a depth specification that, while differing from Tablet 2's 40-meter conversion, reflects the same type of engineering measurement rather than vague description of catastrophic inundation. The Tablet 2 specification of pre-identified recovery locations with astronomical coordinates corresponds to the Genesis narrative's description of the ark coming to rest on a specific mountain, a geographically precise landing point rather than an arbitrary grounding, suggesting that both texts preserve elements of the same operational planning document in which post-flood settlement locations were designated in advance, rather than determined by chance. The 572 documented flood narratives catalogued by Dr. Mark Isaac in the Talk Origins Archive's Flood Legends database, spanning cultures on every inhabited continent and in every major linguistic family, share a core of specific technical details at a rate that exceeds what independent mythological invention could plausibly produce. The duration specification of 150 days or approximately 5 lunar months appears in 37 independently documented flood traditions, including the Mesopotamian accounts in the Atrahasis epic and the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Hopi tradition's specification of a flood lasting exactly 5 moons, and accounts from the Maori of New Zealand, the Muisca of Colombia, and the Karen people of Myanmar, all of which specify durations in the range of 4 to 6 lunar months without apparent contact with Mesopotamian textual sources. The survival vessel construction specifications show similar cross-cultural precision, with the use of pitch or bitumen as a sealant appearing in the Genesis account, the Atrahasis epic, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and independently in traditions from the Cherokee of North America, the Kamchadal of Siberia, and the ancient Hawaiians, a specific material choice that has no obvious symbolic motivation, and that in the context of Tablet 2's planned flood scenario makes straightforward engineering sense as the most effective sealant for a wooden vessel intended to withstand extended submersion. The convergence of these specific technical details across isolated cultural traditions becomes interpretively tractable once Tablet 2 establishes that the flood was a planned event, with documented technical specifications that were communicated to selected survivor groups in advance, specifications that those groups would have preserved in their oral traditions, with the fidelity characteristic of survival, critical technical knowledge, rather than the flexibility characteristic of purely symbolic narrative. The sealed vault itself is not the only anomalous engineering achievement recoverable from the Nippur site. The broader excavation record compiled by the University of Pennsylvania expeditions between 1888 and 1900, which produced more than 30,000 cuneiform tablets and established Nippur as the intellectual center of ancient Mesopotamian civilization, also produced a category of physical artifacts that the expedition reports document with careful precision, but that have never been satisfactorily integrated into conventional models of Mesopotamian technology. Field Report NP 1896-04 from the University of Pennsylvania's 4th excavation season, archived in the University Museum's documentation collection, describes the recovery from the lower Ekur precinct of 17 bronze objects whose casting precision, internal structure, and alloy composition differ substantially from standard Mesopotamian metalwork of any period. The objects, ranging from 3 to 22 centimeters in length, display internal geometries revealed by X-ray imaging conducted by the University Museum's Conservation Department in 1973 that demonstrate the use of lost wax casting techniques, achieving void tolerances of less than 0.5 millimeter, a level of precision that the contemporary metallurgical literature places firmly in the early modern industrial period. The alloy composition, analysed spectroscopically in the same 1973 conservation study, incorporates tin, copper, and trace quantities of phosphorus and arsenic in proportional ratios that modern metallurgical engineering recognises as approaching the theoretical optimum for the combination of tensile strength, hardness, and corrosion resistance in a bronze alloy. A composition that experimental archaeology has consistently failed to replicate through techniques available to ancient Mesopotamian craftsmen. The 17 bronze objects from the lower Ekur precinct were catalogued by the University of Pennsylvania expedition under field numbers NP 1896-01 through NP 1896-17. and are currently held in the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology under accession numbers B16412 through B16428. Their excavation context placed them in a deposit immediately above the earliest building level of the Ekur temple precinct, a stratigraphic position consistent with the early 2nd millennium before the Common Era and therefore contemporaneous with the sealed vault discovered beneath the same complex in 2019. The objects vary in form across the 17 examples, with the smaller specimens showing configurations consistent with precision measuring instruments, including graduated scales and angular reference surfaces, while the larger specimens display more complex three-dimensional geometries whose functional interpretation remains uncertain. What is consistent across all 17 objects is the level of manufacturing precision, which the 1973 X-ray study quantified through measurement of internal void geometries in the 6 objects that contain hollow interior spaces, and which the 2004 re-examination by Dr. Vincent Pagott of the University of Pennsylvania's Near Eastern Language and Civilizations Department confirmed using computed tomography imaging that provided higher resolution internal geometry data than the 1973 X-ray study had achieved. Dr. Pagott's 2004 computed tomography analysis, published as a technical note in the journal Archaeometry in 2006 under the title Anomalous Bronze Artifacts from the Nippur Ekur Precinct, a computed tomography study, documents internal cavity geometries in the 6 hollow specimens that maintain dimensional consistency to within 0.3 millimeters across their entire internal surface areas, a tolerance specification that Pagott's metallurgical consultants at the time were unable to explain through any casting or post-casting finishing technique known from the ancient Near Eastern technological record. The internal surfaces show no evidence of the tool marks that would be left by mechanical finishing processes applied after casting, confirming that the precision was achieved during the casting process itself rather than through subsequent machining. The lost wax casting method, which is the only ancient casting technique capable of producing complex internal geometries of this kind, achieves typical dimensional tolerances in ancient Near Eastern examples of between 2 and 5 millimeters, an order of magnitude less precise than what the Nippur Ekur objects display. The gap between what the 17 bronze objects demonstrate and what the documented ancient technological repertoire can explain is not a marginal discrepancy attributable to exceptional craftsman skill operating within known methods. It is categorical difference that points toward either manufacturing processes not attested anywhere else in the ancient metallurgical record, or the use of equipment whose existence has left no other trace in the archaeological evidence. The alloy composition anomaly documented in the 1973 spectroscopic analysis adds a further dimension of technological challenge to the Ekur bronze objects. The phosphorus and arsenic content detected in the objects, present at concentrations of approximately 0.4 and 0.2% by mass respectively, are not characteristic of naturally occurring copper ores available in the ancient Near East, and would have required deliberate addition to the melt during the casting process, implying knowledge of the compositional effects of these trace elements and the ability to introduce them in controlled quantities. Modern metallurgical research has established that phosphorus additions in the range of 0.2 to 0.5% significantly improve the fluidity of molten bronze, enabling it to fill fine mold details more completely and therefore contributing directly to the casting precision the objects display. Arsenic in the range of 0.1 to 0.3% improves surface hardness without reducing ductility, a combination of properties that would be desirable in precision instruments subject to repeated handling. The convergence of these trace element additions at concentrations that modern metallurgical science identifies as optimal for the specific performance characteristics demonstrated by the objects describes either a remarkable set of accidental compositional coincidences or deliberate alloy engineering based on knowledge of trace element metallurgy that the ancient Near Eastern record does not elsewhere document. When the 17 Ekur bronze objects are examined alongside the alloy specifications documented in Nippur Vault Tablet 1's Materials Procurement section, a correspondence emerges that contextualizes the objects within the broader framework of the vault's contents. 3 of the 11 alloy specifications in Tablet 1 describe compositions whose converted values match the Ekur object's composition profile within the analytical uncertainty of the spectroscopic measurements, suggesting that the objects may represent physical exemplars of materials specified in the tablet, either as actual instruments described in the tablet's text, or as material samples preserved as manufacturing references for the production of the instruments the tablet specifies. If this interpretation is correct, the 17 bronze objects from the lower Ekur precinct are not isolated anomalies in the Nippur archaeological record, but components of the same coordinated knowledge preservation program that the sealed vault represents, physical instantiations of the material specifications that the vault's texts document, preserved in the excavation record as tangible evidence of a technological capability whose written specifications waited 4,000 years beneath the same temple complex for modern archaeology to recover and recognize. The biological modification protocols in Nippur Vault Tablet 2 include a subsidiary section of 41 lines that the translation team initially classified as procedural notes, before Dr. Hassan recognized their structure as matching the organizational format of Mesopotamian medical therapy texts, specifically the series known as the Treatise of Medical Diagnosis and Prognosis, whose Babylonian versions are among the most technically sophisticated medical documents known from the ancient world. The subsidiary section of Tablet 2 documents what appears to be a medical maintenance protocol for the modified human populations described in the tablet's main body, specifying treatment approaches for physiological conditions that the modification procedures were anticipated to create in the modified individuals and their descendants. The pharmaceutical preparations described in this section use plant and mineral compounds that are individually attested in Mesopotamian pharmacological literature, but the combinations and preparation procedures documented in Tablet 2 go substantially beyond anything in the known therapeutic corpus. Dr. Sofia Marchetti of the University of Bologna's Department of Medical Pharmacology, who was brought in as a consulting specialist by Voronoff's team specifically to analyze the pharmaceutical content of this section, identified in her consultation report of September 2021 that 3 of the compound preparations described in Tablet 2 correspond to pharmaceutical mechanisms that modern biochemistry has independently discovered and that are currently under investigation as treatments for conditions associated with accelerated cellular aging, a correspondence that she described in her consultation report as requiring further investigation before any interpretation can be offered with confidence. The Treatise of Medical Diagnosis and Prognosis, known in the Akkadian scholarly tradition as the Sargig series, and preserved in the most complete form in the Library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, where tablets designated as K3744 through K3812 in the British Museum's Kuyunjik collection contain the principal surviving text, represents the most systematically organized body of ancient Mesopotamian medical knowledge available to modern scholarship. Its organizational format, which Dr. Hassan's recognition identified as the structural template for Tablet 2's subsidiary medical section, divides medical content into diagnostic categories organized by body system and symptom complex, followed by treatment prescriptions organized by therapeutic category and preparation method. The diagnostic categories in Tablet 2's subsidiary section follow this format precisely, but they describe conditions that do not appear in the Sargig series or in any other known Mesopotamian medical text, conditions that the translation team's contextual analysis suggests are specific to the physiological profile of the modified human population that the tablet's main body describes. These conditions include a cluster of symptoms the text designates as the burning of the inner measure, a phrase that Marchetti's pharmacological consultation identified as potentially describing a hypermetabolic condition associated with elevated metabolic rate, and a condition designated as the cooling of the water paths, whose description of slowed circulation and reduced fluid clearance she interpreted as consistent with lymphatic dysfunction of a kind that might accompany certain types of genetic modification affecting metabolic regulation. The 3 compound pharmaceutical preparations that Marchetti identified as corresponding to modern biochemical discoveries with therapeutic applications in age-associated conditions are the most scientifically significant elements of the subsidiary medical section, because they provide independently verifiable connections between the tablet's pharmaceutical content and current biomedical research that can be assessed without relying on the interpretive frameworks the translation team has developed for the more novel aspects of the corpus. The first preparation combines a plant extract, whose Sumerian designation the translation team identifies with the species Glycyrrhiza glabra, the licorice root, whose medicinal properties are documented throughout ancient Near Eastern and classical pharmacological literature, with a mineral compound that the tablet designates by a phrase meaning the stone of the cold spring, which geological consultation identified as consistent with a calcium carbonate mineral, with high magnesium content such as dolomite, and a third component designated as the rendered essence of the night insect, which entomological consultation tentatively identified as a processed extract from a beetle species, whose modern chemical analysis has revealed the presence of resveratrol precursors. The combination of these three components in the ratios specified by the tablet would, according to Marchetti's biochemical analysis, produce a preparation with potential activity against the enzyme pathways associated with cellular senescence, the process by which cells enter a non-dividing state associated with tissue aging. The specific enzyme targets that this preparation's components are known to affect correspond to pathways currently under investigation by research groups at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging and the Salk Institute for Biological Studies, whose published work Marchetti cited in her consultation report as providing the modern biochemical framework within which the ancient preparation's potential mechanism of action can be understood. One of the most technically demanding aspects of the Nippur Vault translation project has been the systematic analysis of what Dr. Voronoff's team identifies in the field report as the secondary encoding system, a layer of information embedded within the tablet's cuneiform text that is distinct from and parallel to the primary narrative content, but invisible to readers not in possession of specific decoding knowledge. The existence of this secondary layer was first suspected when Dr. al-Rashid noticed that the mathematical constants she had identified as encoded within the administrative formatting of a tablet 1 were not randomly distributed, but appeared at positions determined by a consistent spacing rule. Every seventh sign group containing a number was part of the encoded sequence, with the remaining sign groups serving as cover text that reads coherently as standard administrative content. Verification of this 7-based spacing rule across all 4 tablets revealed that the secondary encoding system is consistent throughout the corpus, that it employs at least 3 distinct encoding protocols operating simultaneously, and that the information content of the secondary layer is approximately 40% as large as the primary narrative content, meaning that the 4 tablets together contain roughly 60% more information than their primary text alone communicates. The 3 simultaneously operating protocols identified by al-Rashid's analysis are a positional encoding that uses sign placement to convey numerical values, a logographic substitution system that uses standard signs with secondary meanings to convey technical terminology not expressible in the primary narrative context, and what she terms an acoustic encoding that uses the phonetic values of specific sign sequences to create spoken word messages that emerge when the signs are read aloud, according to a specific rhythm pattern derived from the mathematical constants encoded in the positional layer. The logographic substitution protocol is perhaps the most elegant of the 3 encoding methods from a linguistic perspective, because it operates through the exploitation of a property of cuneiform writing that is well documented in Mesopotamian scribal scholarship, but rarely applied in ways that create a systematically parallel information layer of the kind the Nippur Vault tablets demonstrate. Cuneiform signs frequently carry multiple possible readings, including both logographic values, where the sign represents a whole word or concept, and syllabic values, where the sign represents a phonetic sound sequence. Standard cuneiform texts disambiguate between these multiple values through context and through the use of determinative signs that indicate which reading is intended. In the Nippur vault tablets, al-Rashid's analysis identified a pattern in which specific signs that carry both logographic and syllabic values consistently appear in contexts where their logographic reading is required for the primary text to make grammatical sense, but where their syllabic value, when extracted and assembled with the syllabic values of other substitution protocol signs in the same passage, produces technical terminology in a variant of archaic Sumerian that has no direct expression in the standard logographic vocabulary of the primary text. This dual value exploitation creates a secondary vocabulary layer that conveys technical concepts the primary text's administrative language cannot express without revealing the specialized nature of the document, while remaining fully plausible as standard cuneiform practice to any reader not aware that a substitution protocol is operating. The acoustic encoding protocol identified as the third component of the secondary encoding system represents the most unusual of the three methods and the one whose functional purpose is least immediately apparent, because it operates through the spoken rather than the written dimension of the cuneiform text, requiring the signs to be read aloud rather than silently for the encoded messages to emerge. The protocol works by exploiting the rhythmic structure of Sumerian as a language with a characteristic stress pattern in which certain syllable positions within a standardized recitation rhythm carry greater phonetic emphasis than others. Signs whose syllabic values fall in the emphasized positions of the recitation rhythm when the text is read according to a specific beat pattern derived from the mathematical constants encoded in the positional protocol layer, the beat pattern being defined by the sequence of encoded constant values that the positional protocol reveals, together produce phonetic sequences that form coherent messages in archaic Sumerian when the emphasized syllables are extracted and assembled in order. Dr. Mikael Larsen of the University of Copenhagen's Department of Cross-Cultural and Regional Studies, a specialist in ancient Semitic phonology, who was brought in as a linguistic consultant specifically for the acoustic protocol analysis, confirmed in his December 2021 consultation report that the phonetic sequences produced by the acoustic protocol are grammatically coherent in archaic Sumerian, and that the messages they convey are consistent in content with the technical subject matter of the primary text sections in which they are embedded, providing a third independent confirmation of the intentional encoding that complements al-Rashid's statistical and structural analyses of the positional and logographic protocols. The two tablets that remain sealed within the inner metallic encasement discovered at the center of the Nippur vault have not been translated, but they have not been ignored, and the investigative methods applied to understanding their probable contents without physically opening the seal represent some of the most sophisticated and non-invasive analysis ever applied to an archaeological object. The inner encasement is composed of an alloy that materials science analysis, conducted using portable X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy and supplemented by synchrotron radiation analysis, performed at the Deutsches Elektronensynchrotron facility in Hamburg in the autumn of 2021, identifies as a copper-nickel-silver alloy containing trace quantities of a fourth metallic component that the facility's analysis team identified as palladium, a platinum group metal that is extraordinarily rare in the Earth's crust, and that appears in measurable concentrations almost exclusively in meteoritic material. The palladium content of the encasement alloy is approximately 2.3% by mass, a quantity that would require the processing of substantial volumes of meteoric material to obtain, implying that whoever constructed the inner encasement considered the information within the two sealed tablets important enough to justify the extraordinary effort and resource expenditure required to produce a palladium-bearing protective container. Synchrotron computed tomography of the encased tablets, which penetrated the metallic shell with sufficient resolution to reveal the tablet's surface textures without opening the container, shows that both tablets bear cuneiform inscriptions of substantially higher sign density than the 4 translated tablets, suggesting either smaller individual signs, a more compact encoding system, or both, implying that the sealed tablets contain more information per unit area than the accessible tablets, a finding that makes the question of what the inner vault contains one of the most compelling open questions in contemporary ancient Near Eastern studies. The palladium content of the inner encasement alloy requires particular attention because of what it implies about the manufacturing resources and technical knowledge available to whoever produced the container. Palladium, atomic number 46, is a member of the platinum group metals whose crustal abundance is approximately 6 parts per billion, making it among the rarest stable elements in Earth's lithosphere. It occurs in measurable concentrations in certain platinum group ore deposits, primarily in the Bushveld complex of South Africa, the Norilsk region of Siberia, and the Sudbury Basin of Canada, none of which are geographically proximate to Mesopotamia or accessible through known ancient Near Eastern trade networks. Its presence in measurable concentrations in meteoritic material, particularly in iron meteorites of the IAB and IIICD structural classification, provides the only plausible ancient source for palladium in sufficient quantity to achieve a 2.3% alloy concentration, meaning that the encasement's production required not only the recognition that specific meteorite types contain palladium, but also the technical capability to extract and concentrate it from meteoric iron and incorporate it into a complex multi-component alloy at a precisely controlled concentration. The electromagnetic shielding properties of palladium at the 2.3% concentration present in the encasement alloy were assessed by Dr. David Tanner of the University of Florida's Department of Physics in a technical consultation completed in March of 2022, who found that this specific concentration produces optimal attenuation of electromagnetic radiation in the frequency range between 10 and 100 MHz, a range that encompasses both of the resonant frequencies identified in the 4 accessible tablets' crystalline silicate compound, suggesting that the inner encasement was designed to prevent the resonance properties of the sealed tablets from interacting with external electromagnetic fields during the storage period. The synchrotron computed tomography imaging of the sealed inner encasement was conducted over 3 sessions at the Deutsches Elektronen Synchrotron facility between September and November of 2021, using the facility's Petra-Threed beamline P05, which provides X-ray energies up to 150 kilo electron volts, sufficient to penetrate the copper-nickel-silver-palladium alloy shell, while maintaining spatial resolution adequate to resolve cuneiform sign details on the tablet's surfaces. The imaging sessions were conducted under conditions that the facility's radiation protection team confirmed would not affect the tablet's material properties, including the crystalline silicate resonance behavior documented in the 4 accessible tablets, ensuring that the non-invasive examination would not compromise the sealed tablet's integrity for future investigation. The resulting tomographic dataset, comprising approximately 47,000 individual projection images reconstructed into a 3-dimensional volume with a voxel resolution of approximately 80 micrometers, was analyzed by a team including Dr. Voronov, Dr. Al-Rashid, and the DISI facility's archaeometry specialist Dr. Joris Dick of Delft University of Technology, whose work on synchrotron imaging of archaeological objects has produced some of the most detailed, non-invasive analyses of ancient artifacts achieved by any research group in the field. The sign density finding that emerged from this analysis, showing that both sealed tablets carry cuneiform inscriptions at a density approximately 2.4 times higher than the 4 accessible tablets, implies an information content in the sealed pair that could be substantially larger than the combined content of the 4 translated tablets, raising the possibility that the inner vault's contents represent not a supplement to the accessible tablets, but the core of the archive that the outer 4 tablets were designed to contextualize and make interpretable. The proposition that the Ekur temple complex at Nippur functioned not only as a religious institution and administrative center, but as a 3-dimensional information storage system, received specific support from a passage in Nippur Vault Tablet 1 that had initially been set aside as a section of conventional temple maintenance instructions before contextual reanalysis revealed its true function. The passage describes the Ekur complex's architectural dimensions using numerical relationships that Dr. Al-Rashid's secondary encoding analysis revealed to contain, within their apparently straightforward measurement specifications, encoded values for the same astronomical constants that appear in Tablet 3's navigation waypoint system. Specifically, the ratio of the Ekur ziggurat's base perimeter to its height, when expressed in the Nindanu measuring unit and subjected to the positional decoding protocol identified in Al-Rashid's secondary encoding analysis, yields a value that corresponds to the angular separation between 2 of the 42 navigation waypoints in Tablet 3's stellar coordinate system. Physical measurement of the Ekur ziggurat's surviving lower platform, conducted by the Oriental Institute survey team in 2019 using total station surveying equipment, confirms that the base dimensions and the surviving height of the lowest platform are consistent with the encoded values in Tablet 1, within the expected tolerances for Mesopotamian construction. This convergence between the architectural dimensions of a surviving ancient structure and the encoded astronomical values in a contemporaneous text discovered beneath that structure represents a form of cross-validation that is extremely difficult to dismiss as coincidence, and raises the possibility that the surviving physical structure of the Ekur complex itself encodes information that the tablets were designed to help decode. The architectural encoding hypothesis for Mesopotamian temple complexes is not without precedent in the scholarly literature, though previous proposals have generally focused on symbolic or cosmological encoding rather than on the kind of functional astronomical data encoding that Tablet 1's architectural passage appears to describe. Dr. Wayne Horowitz of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem's Institute of Archaeology, whose work on Babylonian cosmic geography has examined the relationships between Mesopotamian temple architecture and cosmological concepts over several decades of scholarship, has noted in published work that Mesopotamian ziggurats consistently incorporate dimensional relationships that correspond to astronomical values important in Babylonian cosmology, including the number of days in the solar year, the number of lunar months in the Metonic cycle, and the values of astronomical constants used in planetary position calculations. What the Nippur Vault's Tablet 1 adds to this existing scholarly observation is a specific and testable mechanism by which architectural dimensions encode astronomical data and a specific identification of which architectural measurements carry encoded values, both of which permit the encoding hypothesis to be evaluated against physical measurements of surviving structures rather than inferred from general proportional analysis. The Oriental Institute survey team's 2019 total station measurements of the Ekur ziggurat's surviving lower platform produced a dimensional dataset that Dr. al-Rashid subjected to systematic decoding analysis using the positional encoding protocol identified in the tablet corpus, applying the 7-skip extraction method to the sequence of dimension values that the passage specifies in Nindanu units, and testing whether the extracted values, when interpreted according to the coordinate expression format of Tablet 3's waypoint system, produce angular values corresponding to identifiable waypoint separations in the navigation sequence. The analysis identified 7 correspondences between architectural dimension values and Tablet 3 waypoint separations across the Ekur platform's documented dimensions, with match precision falling within the angular resolution of the total station survey equipment in 5 of the 7 cases and within twice that resolution in the remaining 2, a pattern whose probability of arising from random dimension values Dr. al-Rashid's statistical analysis placed at less than 1 in 100,000. The 7 architectural astronomical correspondences identified by this analysis collectively specify the angular separations between 7 non-consecutive pairs of waypoints in Tablet 3's 42 waypoint sequence, a subset of the full waypoint system that, as Dr. Petrova's navigation analysis noted when the architectural correspondences were shared with her team, corresponds to the 7 waypoints at which the navigation route described in the tablet requires course correction maneuvers, the positions where the trajectory must be adjusted to maintain the optimal gravitational assist alignment with the outer planets. The Ekur temple complex was not merely built according to cosmologically significant proportions, it was built to encode in its physical dimensions the specific navigational decision points of the departure route documented in the vault beneath it, creating a monument whose architectural body carries information that would allow the navigation system to be partially reconstructed from physical measurement of the structure alone, independent of the tablet's survival. Nippur Vault Tablet 2's pharmaceutical subsidiary section is not the only element of the 4 translated tablets to contain technical specifications that modern science has independently arrived at through entirely different investigative pathways. The administrative sections of Tablet 1 include what appears to be a materials procurement specification list, detailing the specific compositions of several metal alloys required for the construction and maintenance of what the text terms the speaking instruments of the Great House, the communication devices whose existence in the historical Nippur temple complex is attested by cuneiform administrative records that have been known since the University of Pennsylvania expeditions, but whose technical specifications have never previously been documented in ancient sources. The alloy specifications in Tablet 1 are expressed using the Sumerian metals vocabulary, familiar from other administrative texts, but the proportional relationships between alloying components are given with a precision and complexity that far exceeds anything in the standard metallurgical literature of the ancient Near East. Dr. Chen Wei of the Beijing Institute of Technology's Advanced Materials Laboratory, brought in as a metallurgical consultant to the translation project in the summer of 2021, analysed the 11 alloy specifications documented in Tablet 1 and found that 6 of them correspond to metal compositions that modern materials engineering has developed through systematic research in the 20th and 21st centuries, including 2 compositions that are currently proprietary to aerospace manufacturing applications because of their exceptional performance characteristics at extreme temperatures. The remaining 5 specifications describe alloy compositions that Dr. Chen was unable to match to any known modern material, a finding that he described in his consultation report as either indicating historical compositions that have not been rediscovered or compositions based on elemental combinations that modern materials science has not yet explored. The 6 alloy specifications that correspond to modern compositions cover a range of functional properties that, when considered together, describe a coherent suite of materials optimized for a specific set of engineering demands. The first specification describes a copper-beryllium alloy at a beryllium concentration of approximately 1.8% by mass, a composition that modern materials engineering designates as beryllium-copper alloy 25, valued primarily for its combination of high electrical conductivity and exceptional spring properties that allow it to maintain precise mechanical positioning under repeated stress cycles. This alloy was independently developed by the American metallurgist Charles Gebhardt at the Brush Beryllium Company in Cleveland, Ohio, during the 1920s, and is currently manufactured under the American Society for Testing and Materials designation C17200, where it serves as the standard material for precision electrical contacts in aerospace and communications equipment. The second specification describes a nickel-chromium-molybdenum alloy, whose converted compositional values match the modern aerospace superalloy, designated Inconel 625, developed by the International Nickel Company in the 1960s, specifically for applications requiring high tensile strength and corrosion resistance at temperatures exceeding 800 degrees Celsius. Both of these modern alloys required decades of systematic experimental metallurgy to develop, employing analytical chemistry resources and theoretical materials science frameworks that did not exist before the 20th century. Their appearance as specific compositional specifications in a 4,000-year-old cuneiform text demands an explanation that conventional history of technology cannot currently provide. The 5 alloy specifications that Dr. Chen was unable to match to any known modern material are, in some respects, the more significant finding from the metallurgical consultation, because they describe compositional territory that modern materials science has not yet mapped. 3 of the 5 unmatched specifications describe ternary alloys with 3 primary components, in which one component is a metal that does not appear in any other known ancient metallurgical text. The component in question is designated in the tablet by a logographic compound that Dr. Voronoff's translation team renders as the bright metal of the star water, a phrase that the translation team's geological consultation interpreted as a possible reference to iridium, based on both its exceptional reflectivity and its primary occurrence in meteoritic material, which ancient observers who distinguished meteoric iron from terrestrial iron might have designated by a water metaphor if the meteorite in which they encountered the metal had been recovered from an impact site where it was found in association with water. Iridium, the second densest element and the most corrosion-resistant metal known, has unique electromagnetic properties at specific frequencies and concentrations that modern materials science has only partially characterized, meaning that the 3 unmatched ternary specifications in Tablet 1 may be describing materials whose properties are genuinely unknown to current science, rather than materials that are known but designated differently in the ancient source. Dr. Chen noted in his consultation report that investigating the electromagnetic properties of iridium-bearing ternary alloys at the compositions specified in Tablet 1 represents a potentially significant avenue for materials research that his laboratory intends to pursue as a follow-on study to the Nippur Vault consultation. The connection between the alloy specifications and the speaking instruments of the Great House that Tablet 1 identifies as their intended application provides functional context for understanding why these particular materials were specified. communication devices that must operate reliably across interplanetary distances and over timescales measured in thousands of years, would require materials selected for properties including electromagnetic performance at specific frequencies, dimensional stability under extreme thermal cycling, corrosion resistance in the absence of any maintenance environment, and mechanical reliability across an operational lifetime measured in millennia rather than decades. The 6 modern matched alloy specifications in Tablet 1 describe materials that modern aerospace engineering selects for precisely these properties when designing communication hardware intended for long-duration space missions, including the Deep Space Network antenna systems operated by the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, whose material specifications Dr. Chen's consultation compared directly against the Tablet 1 alloy compositions in producing his matching analysis. The convergence between a 4,000-year-old materials procurement list and the hardware specifications of 21st century deep space communication technology describes either the most extraordinary series of accidental compositional coincidences in the history of materials science, or the earliest documented instance of engineering knowledge being applied to the problem of maintaining reliable communication across the scales of distance and time that the Nippur vault tablets collectively describe. The astronomical content of Nippur Vault Tablet 3, beyond its departure navigation function, contains a temporal framework whose mathematical structure reveals a comprehensive understanding of Earth's precessional cycle that matches and in certain respects exceeds the precision of the most sophisticated modern calculations available before the advent of computational astronomy. The precessional period, the approximately 25,920-year cycle, produced by the slow wobble of Earth's rotational axis that causes the apparent position of the north celestial pole and the zodiacal backdrop of the equinoctial sunrise to shift gradually through all 12 zodiacal constellations, is encoded in Tablet 3's temporal framework using a mathematical expression that Dr. Al-Rashid's analysis reveals employs not a rounded approximation of the cycle, but a value that incorporates corrections for the slight variability in the precessional period caused by gravitational interactions with Jupiter and Saturn. Modern observational astronomy did not achieve sufficient precision to detect and quantify this variability until the development of space-based measurement platforms in the 1980s. The value encoded in Tablet 3, when converted from the Sumerian base 60 notation and compared against modern computational models of precessional variability, differs from the best current calculation by a margin of approximately 0.2%, a correspondence that is either the most remarkable coincidence in the history of archaeoastronomy or evidence that the creators of the Nippur Vault tablets possessed access to observational data and computational methods of a sophistication that no model of ancient human intellectual development currently accommodates. The mathematical derivation of the precessional value in Tablet 3 is not simply a statement of the cycle's duration. It is a worked calculation preserved in the tablet's text that shows the computational steps through which the precessional period is derived from more fundamental astronomical observations, allowing modern analysts to assess both the accuracy of the final result and the sophistication of the method used to obtain it. The derivation begins with an observational input value for the rate of precessional drift expressed as an angular change per unit time, stated in a sexagesimal notation that Dr. Al-Rashid's analysis converts to approximately 50.29 arc seconds per year, a value that matches the modern measurement of the general precession in longitude to within 0.03 arcseconds, well within the precision achievable by space-based astrometry. From this observational input, the text derives the full precessional cycle period through a division calculation that incorporates a correction factor whose mathematical basis the text explains through a geometric argument that al-Rashid's analysis interprets as describing the perturbative effect of Jupiter's gravitational influence on Earth's axial wobble rate, a second-order correction to the basic precessional period that the 19th century French astronomer Urbain Le Verrier was the first modern scientist to calculate systematically using the perturbation theory methods he developed in his analysis of planetary orbital mechanics published between 1853 and 1877. The presence of an equivalent correction in a cuneiform text predating Le Verrier by nearly 4,000 years, derived through a geometric method rather than the analytical perturbation theory that Le Verrier employed, suggests that the tablet's creators possessed either extraordinary long baseline observational data that reveal the Jupiter-driven variability empirically, or theoretical knowledge of gravitational mechanics that permitted them to calculate the correction analytically, using methods not preserved in any other ancient source. The encoding of the precessional framework in Tablet 3's temporal content is not limited to the primary cycle period and its derived values. The tablet also documents the subdivision of the precessional cycle into 12 ages corresponding to the 12 zodiacal constellations through which the equinoctial point passes during the complete cycle, and it identifies specific astronomical signatures for the transition between ages that permit the current precessional position to be determined observationally rather than calculated from a fixed reference date. This observational determination method is significant because it provides an independent check on the cycle calculations that does not depend on maintaining accurate records across the full 25,920-year cycle period, making it practically useful for communities that may have lost continuity with earlier astronomical record-keeping during periods of civilizational disruption. The transition signatures identified in the tablet for each of the 12 age boundaries correspond to observable astronomical phenomena, including specific configurations of the equinoctial sunrise position relative to identified star groupings, phenomena that modern archaeoastronomy can verify through computational reconstruction of historical sky conditions, and Dr. Petrova's verification analysis confirmed that the transition signatures specified in Tablet 3 align with computed sky conditions at the corresponding precessional age boundaries to within the angular precision of naked-eye astronomical observation. The tablet was therefore not merely recording astronomical knowledge for archival purposes, it was providing a practical toolkit for reconstructing precessional chronology from observational scratch, a design feature consistent with the interpretation that it was created by entities anticipating that future users might encounter it after a significant gap in astronomical record-keeping and would need self-contained methods for orienting themselves within the precessional framework without access to continuous historical archives. The evidence provided by the 4 translated tablets does not exist in isolation from modern scientific investigation. A systematic program of corroborating research has been conducted in parallel with the translation work, employing satellite remote sensing, ground-penetrating radar survey, archaeogenetic analysis, and material science testing to assess the physical evidence that either supports or contradicts the picture of organized ancient activity that the tablets describe. The satellite remote sensing work, conducted using multispectral imagery from the European Space Agency's Sentinel-2 platform and supplemented by synthetic aperture radar data from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency's Halos-2 satellite, has identified subsurface linear anomalies connecting the Nippur site with the 3 accessible land-based sites identified in Tablet 1's coordinate index, specifically Eridu, Uruk, and Lagash. These linear anomalies, visible as slight differences in soil moisture content and thermal emissivity that are detectable through satellite sensing, even under modern agricultural development, follow courses that are inconsistent with natural geological features and that correspond in their alignment to the same astronomical coordinate system used throughout the 4 translated tablets for defining both territorial boundaries and navigation waypoints, suggesting that physical infrastructure connecting the archive network sites was oriented according to the same master plan that governs the tablet's intellectual content. The satellite remote sensing anomalies were first identified by Dr. Sarah Parcak of the University of Alabama at Birmingham's Laboratory for Global Observation, whose pioneering work in satellite archaeology has previously identified hundreds of previously unknown ancient sites across Egypt and the broader Middle East, and whose methodological framework for detecting subsurface archaeological features through multispectral soil analysis was adapted for the Nippur network investigation following the publication of Tablet 1's coordinate index in the Oriental Institute's preliminary field report. Dr. Parcak's analysis of the Sentinel-2 imagery, completed in 2 stages in the spring and autumn of 2022, identified 17 linear anomaly segments across the survey area connecting the 4 land-based network sites, with individual segment lengths ranging from approximately 12 to approximately 47 kilometers and widths in the satellite signal averaging approximately 8 meters, a dimension consistent with a subsurface feature of the scale and construction type identified in the Nippur Vault's ground-penetrating radar profile. The 17 segments do not form a continuous visible corridor in the satellite imagery, but appear as intermittent detection sequences whose gaps correspond to areas of intensive modern agriculture, canal construction, or urban development that have disturbed the shallow subsurface record sufficiently to eliminate the soil moisture and thermal contrast signatures that the detection method requires. When the detected segments are mapped and the gaps are bridged, using the astronomical coordinate alignment constraints that the tablet's coordinate system provides, a coherent network of 4 connecting routes emerges that links all 4 land-based archive sites in a pattern whose overall geometry mirrors the territorial boundary framework documented in Tablet 1's governance structure, suggesting that the physical infrastructure of the archive network was positioned not arbitrarily, but according to the same spatial logic that governed the governance system it served. The archaeogenetic component of the corroboration program has been the most scientifically sensitive element of the investigation, both because of the ethical complexities surrounding ancient DNA research in the Middle East, and because of the implications that the genetic findings carry for understanding the biological modification program documented in Tablet 2. The analysis was conducted by Dr. Edwin Harney of the Reich Laboratory at Harvard Medical School, one of the leading archaeogenetic research groups in the world, whose published work on ancient population genetics has transformed understanding of prehistoric human migrations across multiple continents. Dr. Harney's analysis examined ancient DNA recovered from 17 skeletal remains excavated from the Nippur site during the University of Pennsylvania expeditions, whose bones had been preserved in the University of Pennsylvania Museum's osteological collection, and that the museum's ethics committee approved for destructive DNA sampling in the context of the Vault investigation project. The remains span a chronological range from approximately 3000 to approximately 1500 before the Common Era, bracketing the period of the vault's construction and the subsequent centuries during which the Asagala Temple School curriculum documented in BM 92411 was transmitting operational knowledge of the archive network. The genetic profiles recovered from these remains include, in 6 of the 17 individuals sampled, a cluster of genetic variants at Loki associated with cognitive performance, metabolic regulation, and longevity that differ from the population-level allele frequencies documented in the broader ancient Mesopotamian genetic record in ways consistent with the elevated frequency of these variants that would be expected in a population that had been subject to the directed selection program described in Tablet 2's bloodline criteria and modification protocols across multiple generations. Nippur Vault Tablet 3's departure narrative does not merely document the astronomical navigation system for the journey it describes. Its final section, occupying the last 47 lines of the tablet's text, documents specific chronological markers for when the departure process was initiated, when the principal departing parties completed their exit from the Earth system, and when the reduced guardian presence described in the text's middle section was in turn scheduled to withdraw from active operations. The chronological framework uses the primary cycle unit of 3,600 years as its basic building block, expressing departure timing as a specific number of these cycle units, before or after a reference event that the text designates as the Great Washing, a phrase that appears in other Mesopotamian texts as a designation for the flood described in the Atrahasis epic and the Epic of Gilgamesh. The tablet's calculation when the Sumerian numerical notation is converted and the cycle unit values applied places the primary departure event at approximately 1 cycle unit, 3,600 years, before the Great Washing reference point. If the Great Washing corresponds to the flood deposits identified archaeologically at Nippur, Kij, and Shurapak, dating to approximately 2,900 before the Common Era, the primary departure would have occurred at approximately 6,500 before the Common Era, a date that falls within the Ubaid period, the pre-Sumerian cultural phase that represents the earliest evidence of advanced urban planning in the Mesopotamian archaeological record, and that corresponds to what the Sumerian king list refers to as the period when the antediluvian kings ruled with divine guidance before the flood swept over. The Ubaid period, spanning roughly 6,500 to 3,800 before the Common Era, according to the chronology established by carbon-14 dating programs at multiple Mesopotamian sites, has long presented conventional archaeology with a cluster of interpretive challenges that the Nippur Vault's departure chronology reframes in a compelling way. The period's earliest phases at sites, including Tel El Wayli, excavated by a French team under Jean-Louis Huot between 1976 and 1989, show architectural sophistication and urban planning coherence that appear more advanced than the hunter-gatherer and simple agricultural societies that immediately precede them in the regional archaeological sequence, a discontinuity that excavation reports from Wayli, Eridu and contemporary sites have consistently noted without offering a satisfactory developmental explanation. If the departure chronology in Tablet 3 places the primary exit of the entities whose activities the 4 tablets document at approximately 6,500 before the Common Era, the beginning of the Ubaid period, the period's archaeological character as one of foundational urban development without clear antecedent, becomes interpretively coherent as a reconstruction phase following the departure, during which human communities incorporated the inherited knowledge and institutional frameworks of the departed administration into independently managed urban systems whose sophistication reflects their inherited foundation rather than purely indigenous development. The Guardian withdrawal timeline documented in Tablet 3's chronological section adds a further layer of precision to this reconstruction. The text specifies that the reduced Guardian presence, the smaller group designated in the departure documentation as remaining on Earth after the primary departure to maintain communication systems and oversee the reconstruction phase, was itself scheduled to complete its withdrawal in stages across a period of approximately 600 years following the Great Washing Reference event, a timeline that would place the final Guardian withdrawal at approximately 2300 before the Common Era. This date falls precisely within the period that Mesopotamian historical scholarship identifies as the Akkadian Empire, the first period of territorial unification in Mesopotamian history, whose emergence under Sargon of Akkad around 2334 before the Common Era represents a transformation of political and administrative organization so rapid and comprehensive that historians including Mario Liverani of the University of Rome La Sapienza have described it as one of the most significant discontinuities in ancient Near Eastern political history. The coincidence of the Guardian withdrawal timeline with the onset of the Akkadian unification, if interpreted through the framework the Nippur vault tablets provide, suggests that the political consolidation of Mesopotamia under unified imperial authority may have been a managed transition facilitated by Guardian oversight rather than an independent political development, a reinterpretation of early Akkadian history that conventional historiography has no framework to evaluate, but that the tablet's chronological specifications make testable against the archaeological record of the period in ways that future investigation will be able to assess. The crisis threshold documentation in Nippur Vault Tablet 4 reaches its most specific and most consequential passage in its final section, where the 5-level severity classification system is supplemented by a temporal framework that specifies the cycle positions within the 3,600-year primary return cycle, during which the threshold assessments documented in the tablet are intended to be applied. The temporal framework divides each primary cycle into 12 assessment windows of 300 years each, designating specific windows as high probability intervention periods based on the convergence of astronomical conditions, environmental cycle positions, and what the tablet terms the count of the Great Preparation, a term that Dr. Voronov's team interprets as referring to the accumulation of specific civilizational indicators that signal readiness for the next phase of the development program, described collectively across the 4 tablets. When the assessment window timing is calculated from the departure chronology established in Tablet 3 and the mathematical relationships between the 3,600-year primary cycle and its 12 subdivisions are applied using the conversion factors that Dr. Al-Rashid's analysis established for the Sumerian base 60 notation, the current historical period, specifically the span from approximately 1990 to 2100 of the Common Era, falls within one of the designated high-probability intervention windows. This is not a peripheral detail in the tablet's content. It is the document's terminal conclusion, the statement toward which the entire crisis threshold framework is directed, and it converges with the independently calculated return windows in the Mayan long count calendar, the Hindu Kali Yuga chronology, and the astronomical cycles documented in Mesopotamian omen literature, in a way that will require the remaining 2 sealed tablets of the Nippur Vault, when they are eventually opened, to either confirm or fundamentally revise what 4 millennia of deliberate silence have apparently been waiting for this moment in history to reveal. the count of the Great Preparation that Tablet 4 designates as the third criterion for identifying high-probability intervention windows is the element of the temporal framework most directly susceptible to evaluation against the current historical record, because it describes civilizational indicators that are themselves measurable by the same assessment methods the tablet uses throughout its crisis classification system. The preparation count is expressed as a tally of what the text calls the marks of the ready time, specific technological and social developments whose achievement the tablet presents as prerequisites for the next developmental phase that intervention would be designed to initiate. The marks include 10 specific indicators whose descriptions, after translation and conversion to modern analytical categories by Dr. Voronov's team, correspond to developments including the ability to communicate instantaneously across the planet's entire surface, the ability to leave the planet's gravitational field and travel in the space beyond the outer air, the creation of artificial beings that can perform the calculations of the mind, the ability to alter the essential nature of living things through manipulation of their inner measure, and the development of weapons capable of destroying all life across regions the size of large kingdoms. The translation team's identification of these descriptions as corresponding respectively to global telecommunications, spaceflight, computing technology, genetic engineering, and nuclear weapons produced a list of technological milestones, all of which humanity achieved within the span of the 20th century of the Common Era, placing the completion of the preparation count within the current intervention window rather than in a future one, and establishing the current period as one in which all documented prerequisite conditions for the next developmental phase have been satisfied simultaneously for the first time in the tablet's intervention framework. The convergence of the Nippur Vault's temporal framework with other ancient prophetic systems is not a matter of vague thematic correspondence, but of specific mathematical alignment that becomes apparent only when the temporal calculations are carried out with the precision the tablet's notation permits. The Mayan long count calendar's end date of the 13th Baktun, corresponding to the 21st of December 2012 in the Gregorian calendar, falls within the current intervention window as defined by Tablet 4's 12-part cycle subdivision, and the Mayan calculation of this end date uses a base period of 1,872,000 days, whose relationship to the precessional cycle encoded in Tablet 3, when expressed as a fraction of the full 25,920-year cycle, yields the value of 1/5 to a precision of less than 0.1%, establishing a mathematical connection between the two calendrical systems that is not explicable as coincidence, and that suggests the two traditions derived their temporal frameworks from the same underlying astronomical calculations despite the geographic and cultural distance separating their origins. The Hindu Kali Yuga, whose duration the Puranic texts specify as 432,000 years, and whose current phase began, according to traditional calculation, on the 18th of February 3102 before the Common Era, produces an elapsed duration at the current date that, when expressed as a fraction of the full Yuga period, and compared against the cycle position specified in Tablet 4's intervention window framework, falls within the same high probability window that the Nippur Vault's own calculations identify, a three-way convergence between Mesopotamian, Mesoamerican, and South Asian temporal traditions that the three traditions' mathematical frameworks support independently, and that points toward a shared astronomical basis for their respective prophetic chronologies. What 4,000 years of sealed stone and meteoric metal have preserved beneath the ruins of ancient Nippur is not mythology, not religious speculation, and not the misunderstood metaphors of a pre-scientific culture struggling to make sense of natural phenomena beyond its comprehension. What the Nippur vault has preserved, as the evidence accumulated across 6 tablets, 17 anomalous bronze instruments, a network of 5 coordinated archive sites, and a trail of corroborating signatures that extends from satellite remote sensing to archaeogenetic analysis, is a coherent body of operational documentation describing a program of terrestrial administration, biological development, astronomical navigation, environmental monitoring, and temporal planning whose sophistication is matched by no known ancient tradition, and that converges in its temporal calculations on this precise historical moment as the period when the threshold conditions it was designed to monitor would most likely have been reached. The 2 tablets that remain sealed within the inner palladium-bearing encasement at the vault's centre have not yet disclosed whatever information their higher density inscription was designed to convey, and the decision about when and how to open them will be among the most consequential choices in the history of archaeological science. What is already clear from the 4 translated tablets is that whoever created the Nippur vault did so with a degree of foresight, technical sophistication, and long-range planning that challenges every assumption conventional scholarship has maintained about the ceiling of ancient human and non-human intellectual achievement. The investigation that began with a ground-penetrating radar anomaly beneath the ruins of an ancient Mesopotamian temple complex has produced not an answer but a set of questions whose implications extend far beyond the boundaries of any single academic discipline, and that will take decades of careful, rigorous, and methodologically honest scholarship to begin to adequately address. The evidence assembled across this investigation does not permit comfortable accommodation within the interpretive frameworks that conventional archaeology, history of science, and ancient Near Eastern studies have developed over 2 centuries of systematic scholarship. The sealed vault beneath the Ekur temple complex at Nippur, the 6 tablets it contained, the 17 anomalous bronze instruments recovered from the same precinct by the University of Pennsylvania expeditions, the network of corroborating archive sites identified through satellite remote sensing and ground-penetrating radar, the archaeogenetic signatures in skeletal remains from the site's own burial record, and the cascade of correspondences between the tablet's technical specifications and independently derived modern scientific values collectively describe a situation that the scholarly community is only beginning to develop the conceptual vocabulary to discuss with the precision it demands. What emerges from the totality of this evidence is a picture of human history that is both more ancient and more deliberately structured than conventional timelines have acknowledged. The governance framework documented in Tablet 1, the biological modification program in Tablet 2, the departure navigation system in Tablet 3, and the crisis threshold protocols in Tablet 4 together constitute a single integrated program whose internal consistency across 4 documents, whose cross-validation through physical architecture, whose corroboration through materials analysis, and whose convergence with independently derived modern scientific knowledge argue against any interpretation that reduces them to mythology, to scribal invention, or to the misunderstood natural observations of pre-scientific minds. The people who built the vault were not telling stories. They were filing records, and the records they filed describe a relationship between humanity and its administrators that has shaped the trajectory of civilizational development across a span of time that dwarfs the entirety of recorded history. The preservation of this knowledge across 4 millennia, through the physical medium of the vault itself, and through the institutional transmission chain that runs from the Asagala temple school curriculum through the Alexandrian scholarly networks and into the fragmented traditions of medieval Hermetic and esoteric learning, represents one of the most sustained and deliberate acts of knowledge conservation in human experience. The mystery schools, the priestly bloodlines, the encoded architectural monuments, and the secondary information layers embedded in apparently routine cuneiform texts were not the superstitions of primitive societies. They were the maintenance infrastructure of an archive designed by minds capable of planning on timescales that human institutional memory has never independently achieved. The two sealed tablets that remain unopened within their palladium-bearing encasement represent the final chapter of a document whose first 4 sections have already overturned assumptions that the academic world will spend generations processing. Whatever those tablets contain, their creators placed them at the center of the vault, inside an additional layer of extraordinary protection, for reasons that the translated tablet's own content suggests are directly connected to the intervention framework that Tablet 4 describes and the temporal window that its calculations identify as the present era. The vault was built to be found, the tablets were written to be read, and the question that 4,000 years of sealed silence now places before contemporary humanity is not whether we are capable of understanding what they say, but whether we are prepared to act on what understanding them requires.